You have in your packets a memo from my office that is a NERA overview. And so what I wanted to do was really hit the high points in terms of urban renewal and what it means to the council and how council and NERA interact as it relates to urban renewal. So in a very general sense, the plans that NERA operates under are plans of the council. So the city council adopts urban renewal plans, and then NERA's job is to implement those plans on behalf of the city council. So you have in your packet the maps that identify the plans that have been adopted historically. NERA was formed in 1990, but there's been a lot of evolution of the plans since the original creation of the Northglenn Urban Renewal Authority. And you have, again, maps that show Plan Area 1 and Plan Area 2 and the various TIF clocks that apply to the various areas within those plan areas. To me, anyway, fundamentally, the only way that urban renewal works is for the Urban Renewal Authority to know, in fact, that it is implementing the plan of the city. And so, at least as I understand it, a lot of the origin for having these joint meetings was for NERA to know that, in fact, it was doing the council's work as the council saw it appropriate. So the urban renewal plans as adopted by the city council have a lot of breadth to them. And so absent the ability of NERA to check in with the city council and assure that, in fact, the way in which NERA is adopting the plans is consistent with that vision is why these joint meetings were started. Is that fairly accurate? And so in my memo, you have a lot of the nuts and bolts of how to blight property if the city council determined it appropriate to either create a new plan area or add property to an existing plan area and amend an existing plan. You hear a lot about TIF. TIF is tax increment financing. TIF is the revenue that goes as a matter of law to the special fund of an urban renewal authority once the TIF clock is started. You will often hear that urban renewal authorities or urban renewal plans have a life of 25 years. I would suggest to you that that's inaccurate. Urban renewal plans in some cases live forever or have a long life. However, TIF can only be collected for 25 years, and that's an important distinction. There is a case cited in the memo that came out of the city of Arvada from, I don't know, about 12, 13 years ago, where Arvada actually, in one particular case, certified that it had remedied blight. And that ended up having some unforeseen consequences on Arvada's ability to do additional things at that time. So I would suggest to you that the remediation of blight and the prevention of the spread of blight under the Colorado Urban Renewal Law is a process. And you're always trying to remediate that blight in your community, prevent the spread of blight in your community. But the ability to collect TIF within a given TIF area only extends for 25 years. As of now, Northglenn has not adopted a new plan or amended an existing plan since the adoption or the effective date of House Bill 151348. What that means is that Northglenn's current plans are not subject to the provisions of House Bill 1348. So the number of commissioners on NERA currently, there is not a designee of the counties, there is not a member of any of the special districts. within the plan area. And that's because House Bill 1348 has not been triggered in Northglenn. If the city decides to adopt a new plan or substantially modify an existing plan, that would trigger House Bill 1348. So again, as of today, it's not triggered. And to be extremely oversimplified in how this operates, the plans that exist today are intended to be largely self-executing. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that NURA can implement the plans without coming back to City Council. Absent City Council action, in most cases there's not going to be any amendment to the plan at all. And so these check-ins from NURA are important to assure that it is in fact implementing your plans, even though it doesn't have to come back to you for explicit approval. There's no agreements that require your signature, but nonetheless, it is your plans to remediate blight that it is their job to implement. That's really all I wanted to cover in terms of sort of the broad umbrella of urban renewal, and then leave it to Debbie and the other folks you have to talk about the much more exciting things that are actually happening in Northglenn, and not hear me talk about the umbrella of why it's happening.
Are there any questions for Corey before we move to Debbie?
Well, I'm also going to be brief because we do have a guest speaker here, Tyler Carlson with Evergreen Development, who's going to give us an update on the Huron Center as well as the marketplace. You do have a PowerPoint presentation for each of those in your packet. I did want to go over in your memorandum, you do have a chart in there, and I wanted to briefly go over that just to give new council members an idea of how much money NURA has reinvested into our community to cure blight. So around $41 million has been reinvested to cure blight in our commercial areas. We do not have any residential areas, as you'll see from the map. The one that is in your packet attached to the memo, this actually identifies all the URA plan areas and their TIF areas. And as you can see, the red area here, URA Plan 1, TIF Area 1 Marketplace is what we call it. There are also some other red areas in here, Vitamin Cottage, Best Buy. Those were all properties that were already redeveloped, and they have now, the TIF has expired as of the 25-year clock, as Mr. Hoffman was relating to you before. So this kind of gives you an idea. In the URA Plan 1, Huron Center is in URA 1. So sometimes that gets a little bit confusing because Marketplace was always just URA 1. But Huron Center is in URA 1, but the clock didn't start until 2011. So we have 25 years from that date to collect on the TIF revenue. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Some of the big projects, of course, that we've worked on have been the original Marketplace, the rebuild, the Sears acquisition of that property, for instance. Also, the preparation for the Marketplace to be done. So there's land acquisition, but there's land preparation. We did, of course, the next one that we did was the Huron Center. NURA went in and acquired all of the property there, purchased it all, and then found a developer to come in, which was Walmart, and to actually build the Walmart. We are still paying for some finalization of the remediation on the Garland Center. So they are still paying dollars on that. Civic Center, so even 10 years, 12 years ago, there used to be a Sinclair there. There used to be a Heidi's there and a little strip mall. NURA went in and they demoed all those buildings. They got the land prepared. It took us a while to actually get the development to happen, but of course, as you see it now, you've got Webster Lake Promenade. NURA paid for all the infrastructure to make that project happen. So just giving you some ideas. Excuse me. Community Center Drive, that's another project that we did. All of the walls and all of that was done and paid for. SEL's traffic signal that was put in there, NURA paid for that. And NERA is paying for the Huron Center redevelopment for all of the infrastructure that's going in there, especially the stormwater, which is really important for our residents to know, in the fact that there was a major stormwater problem there, coming all the way down from Federal, all the way down Northglenn, all the way down, dumping into the Huron Center, also flooding properties in the way as well. By putting in this new stormwater system, that will help alleviate those problems and allow the Huron Center to actually be redeveloped. It wasn't redevelopable before in the magnitude that we're going to be talking about tonight. Northglenn Marketplace, the current Northglenn Marketplace, which we're going to be talking about tonight, we were also able to put in dollars there, as we approved in December, to help with the redevelopment of Phase 1. So we're going to turn it over to Tyler, but I first wanted to just ask if there was any questions in reference to NERA or the NERA board members here tonight. Again, our goal is to keep the communication open. We give a quarterly report to you, and we're always looking for ideas as we go forward. We'll be having a retreat as well, and be looking at future potential redevelopment projects. No questions? Okay, well then I'm going to ask Mr. Tyler Carlson to come up, and I'm going to get his presentations up here. Marketplace first? No problem. You just do that. And here it is. Yes, if you'd like that.
Just click the button.
Just click the button.
Awesome.
Yep.
Mayor and Council, it's good to be before you again. And I think it's important to acknowledge how important urban renewal is to redeveloping properties like the Marketplace or the Huron Center. You know, one of the big talking points in this arena is the but-for argument. You know, but for the funding from an urban renewal authority, these projects wouldn't happen. And I think the Huron Center and the Marketplace are perfect examples of the but-for, because without staff's engagement, without the financial resources that NERA brings to the table, these two projects would frankly still be in a malaise today, and the exciting tenancy and redevelopments that we're going through right now would not be taking place. You know, I think the concern that a lot of anti-urban renewal people have is that urban renewal authorities are just a charade for developers to get rich, and these projects would happen just anyways, and it's just a way to pad people's pockets, and that's absolutely not the case. As Debbie knows, especially working with some of the former owners of the Huron Center in particular, it took some extraordinary efforts and some extraordinary vision, I think, from the urban renewal authority to even control these properties and put them in a position where something could happen. So anyways, I want to thank and congratulate the city for being proactive. You guys aren't just sitting back, waiting for stuff to happen. You guys are out there engaging the marketplace, driving an agenda, and frankly influencing how these properties are developed. And we got into the weeds with the Huron Center on the specific types of tenants you guys wanted. And fortunately we were able to deliver, maybe not as fast as everyone had hoped. And I think that's also playing out with the marketplace. So real quickly,
Just kind of roll it.
roller. Oh, the roller on the side.
Let's get back there.
That's right. There we go. There we go. Okay, perfect. Yeah, okay, got it. So, Hutenski Capital Partners is the owner of the property. Evergreen, my company, are their development consultant. We've got Mulhern and Kinley Horn working on the consultant side. I think everyone's pretty familiar with it, so I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on it. But just a refresher, Hutenski owns everything that's shaded. Lowe's is not a part, and the property owned by Summit is not a part as well. That was the original Mervyn's building, and then Lowe's. And the goal with the marketplace is to go through this refreshing, this rebranding, with new signage, new logos, new landscaping, and most importantly, an entertainment district on the far north end. And this is where the but-for argument is really apparent, because but for the incentive that the city, that NERA agreed to with Hutenski in December, we would not be able to move forward with the theater negotiations that are going on right now. there's no way that we could have economically done the improvements to those buildings and the plazas and everything else that's necessary for a theater were it not for the commitment of the NERA funds in December. I'm happy to say that because of that commitment, the negotiations are very active. They've narrowed it down from 4 theaters down to 2 and are going through those negotiations right now and hope to have gone from 2 to 1 this month. So the time frame remains the same. A lot of you guys saw these slides at the end of last year, but our job number 1 is to negotiate the movie theater deal and to negotiate for the relocation of Bed Bath & Beyond within the center from its current location at the north end to the building adjacent to Lowe's, so that will remain in place. We're also considering a potential relocation of Joann's to the former Office Depot building, but that is going to be, again, subject to the exact size of the building that the movie theater needs. Once those lease negotiations are in place, then we'll move right into permitting and the relocation and the construction that'll happen later this year, and then in 2019 is when we'll also be doing the rebranding, the landscape improvements. And so, this is a schematic that shows one of the potential demising options for the movie theater box. It's for a smaller format theater with some restaurant space carved into the front wall, leaving Joann's in place. This is one option that we're exploring with one of the movie theater operators. This is another option we're looking at where the movie theater would take the full Old Navy and Bed Bath & Beyond box. That's the second one that's on the table right now that we're going back and forth in terms of these negotiations. Again, that's that first option that I mentioned just in plan view. Again, as you can see, there's some pretty significant changes to that building facade right now. It's a very, unarticulated, just flat wall that just stretches right across there, but carving out a courtyard feature into the building entry to create a sense of place. This is some renderings that Mulhern put together just to give an idea of, again, what that plaza feature might look like once we get into the details with the theater operators on planning that placemaking. You're adding an architectural tower element to add some verticality to the east side of that building. And again, of the 3D rendering that I think a lot of you have seen. So again, none of this would be possible were it not for that commitment from the Urban Renewal Authority and indirectly by the city. So we're very grateful that you're making this even a possible conversation. Another photo. And I think that's it. The thing that we are ready to kick off now is the rebranding of the marketplace. Creating a new identity for the center, improving its signage, improving its landscaping is all in process. And I don't have anything to present to you tonight, but we've got a bunch of different concept ideas that are being floated. Part of it is we need to get the buy-in from the theater because the theater is going to be one of the primary anchors for the center. We want to make sure that they are on the same page with us in terms of that branding. But this year will come the plans for the signage and the landscaping. And again, trying to take this center spine of the project and redesign it in a way so that it's following the yellow brick road from 104th Avenue north to where the theater is at. Part of the challenge with the center is because there's such a significant distance between 104th and the north end that it's easy, it's not visually intuitive what's all the way down there, a quarter mile, and also it's compounded by the topography between 104th and those buildings, and so adding signage waypoints along the way to draw people in. Again, there's some of the signage locations we've talked about before. So that is Northglenn Marketplace. So does anyone have any questions about the marketplace before we move on to the Huron Center? Yes, Rosie.
As much as you can you explain the complications of the CCNRs and just so that the council can benefit from that, what we're up against in some cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go back to the ownership map because it helps explain it. So, at the time that the Northglenn Marketplace was redeveloped 20-something years ago, the Perlmutters struck deals with Mervyn's and Lowe's. And when you strike any deal with an anchor tenant, you have to give them rights over the shopping center that help them have control that it's not going to go downhill. You know, and I mean, what Lowe's doesn't want to do is invest, you know, tens of millions of dollars building a building here, and then the surrounding shopping center goes to hell because the landlord decides to turn into, you know, some sort of, you know, gambling racetrack, you know, porn emporium. You know, they want it maintained to a certain standard. They only want a certain type of tenancy in there. They don't want the parking lots being monkeyed with because they want it to be a functional center. Same thing, you know, for the old Mervyn's box. The downside to giving away those rights to an anchor tenant is what you have today with the Mervyn's building, because Mervyn's is obviously no longer there. All those rights that give that property control over the center have now accrued to a third-party owner who has different incentives. And that's one of the big challenges we not only faced here, but also with the Huron Center, is these, they're called, you know, CC&Rs, you know, covenants, restrictions, documents that govern these properties. And these two owners basically have a veto right on changing anything in the common areas. And the common area is basically anything that's not a building. So, you know, any of the parking lots, any of the access drives, and any of the kind of common landscaping, you literally can't remove one parking stall without the consent, express consent of these two owners. And that is a big problem, because you've frankly, you know, for example, this part of the site, this northwest corner, this vacant parking lot's an underutilized parcel. You know, what the market wants, what NURA and I think the city wants is, you know, this is an underutilized piece of property that could be generating revenue for the city and creating co-tenancy for the center, but we can't do anything about it. And so because of that fact, we had to structure our deal with Utensky and with NURA to account for the fact that we really can't touch today, you know, this property. You know, what we need to do is focus within the boundaries of the current buildings. And, you know, fortunately, the movie theater deals on the table don't require us to do that. You know, we don't require us to go into the common area. We can, you know, relocate Bed Bath & Beyond, you know, over here adjacent to Lowe's. You know, we can put a new movie theater in there and not impact those parking fields. But it's a big deal because the ownership of specifically the old Mervyn's building was trying to use their control rights in the declaration as a point of leverage with the city. I'm happy to say that they have come calling a couple times since this has all gone down, wondering what's going on, and the train has now left the tracks and feeling a little more exposed than they were 3 months ago. So it's, I think it was the right call by NURA, by the city, to not throw money after, in my opinion, a bad actor who had different motivations than the better good of the center, and to focus the capital investment on the change that we can effectuate, get that done. I mean, long term, does it make sense for this piece to be folded in and other changes to happen in a phase 2? Absolutely. I don't think that long-term vision has gone away. But what we've done is we've taken the capital, we focused on projects we can execute near term that's going to generate real return for the city, for the shopping center, and then from there, you'll let things play out as they play out. It's a long answer to a short question, Rosie.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, any other questions about the marketplace? Yes?
What are the plans
Or thoughts around how we can use some of the vacant, other vacant buildings like the Sports Authority?
Yeah, exactly. So the two vacant buildings over here are the Sports Authority, the Sports Authority and the Borders building. You know, one building will be occupied by Bed Bath & Beyond. It'll help them right size the store, which is actually really important because they've got a big space right now, and almost every junior box is right sizing, which means shrinking. And fortunately, we've got a spot within the center where they can right size and we don't lose them, like has happened to a lot of tenants who've frankly fled north to Westminster to the Orchards project. So Bed Bath is taking one. You know, the other building has got potential for fitness. Has got other, we have had some other interest from some other soft goods type users, and so Sullivan Hayes, the broker, is out negotiating right now with several different users to occupy that. You know, fortunately, both of those boxes are on the highway, so they've got great visibility, so they're easier to lease. You know, it's more of a challenge. You know, the old Office Depot, you know, the old Office Depot buildings, you know, the old Ulta building here on the west end are more difficult because they don't have that same highway visibility. So those are more of a challenge, if I'm candid with you.
Mm-hmm.
But we do think if a fitness deal is struck, it would be a good use. Fitness brings people to a center, ideally, if you're working out, multiple times a week. And similar to what a grocery store does, as much as we love office and pet supply, usually aren't going there every week. It's a once a month kind of stop if you're shopping intelligently, or for office supplies once a quarter. But the nice thing about grocery and fitness is it's a weekly routine driver, and it gets people into the center. Same thing with the movie theater. You may not go to a movie every weekend, but most people, if they're moviegoers, will go, once or twice a month, which is it's a decent frequency from a turn standpoint. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. And then I'm just curious with the movie theater, I know that many Ward 4 residents will be really excited, but I'm just curious what trends you're seeing nationally related to the fact that, so many young folks are streaming stuff on Netflix and iTunes, and how that's impacting, movie ticket sales.
It
and what
absolutely
that looks like
is
for the
impacting.
future.
Last year, if you read the papers, was not a stellar year for the movie theater industry in general. I think part of it had to do with box office releases was not the best coming out of Hollywood. They were a little distracted with a few other problems. But it's something that every movie theater operator we're talking to is aware of. One thing they're doing to counteract that is incorporate more food and beverage, into their offering. The larger seats. I went to the Denver Pavilion as an example this last week with my kids, and all the seats were like the recliner things, and it was pretty slick. And they're going for fewer seats, higher margin seats with reserved seating too. So it's an industry that's reinventing itself. I think our belief, Utenski's belief, is that movie theaters are not going to go away. They're going to continue to evolve to be relevant, because there's certain experiences that are great sitting on your couch, and there's other experiences that are great going out and about. And I think it'll be similar to our food offerings. A lot of stuff you can eat at home. It's easy, it's fine, it's convenient, but when you want to go out and take your wife on a date, if you ask her to go to the couch to watch the movie, it has a little bit less of impact than taking her out to dinner movie, in my experience. So I don't think that's going to go away, but it's certainly impacting, and that's why, back in the day when this was originally planned, this whole building was all going to be a movie theater, and that movie theater died. The fact that we're only talking about at best 2/3 of that building is also indicative of where the movie theater industry's gone. Everything's shrinking, more of a boutique focus, and I think that's what we'll see here, and probably a food and beverage component baked into that theater offering.
And on the two wings as well, I assume that that's all going to be additional restaurants. Is that safe?
Yeah, the nice thing is this whole bank of buildings was originally built as a soft goods type of part of the center, but when we add an entertainment component, that drives more food and beverage. Even if they're offering food and beverage internal to the deal, not everyone likes the actual movie theater food. So it's our anticipation that over time, both of these wings, you already have Atlanta bread in there, but these wings will redevelop and turn over into restaurant space. One of the opportunities we did talk about with Nura is that eventually, when the CCNR issues play themselves out, as I think they will over the next couple of years, redeveloping this part of the parking lot into a main street out the front door of the movie theater is ripe for the picking, and will give you some really I think interesting opportunities for rooftop patios and those types of things, because they're going to have great southern exposure, visibility coming down the main spine of this project. So I think that's yet to come.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With the center of, I guess, right down the middle as you go into
the spine. Yeah.
Yeah, the spine there. Has there been discussion about improving traffic flow? Versus hitting every single stop sign all the way down?
Yes, that is something absolutely. So this main spineway is going to be the main, and then of course the entry off 104th is going to be the main focus of the landscaping and signage improvements, and working with the traffic department, the public works department at the city to improve the flow of traffic, improve the visual kind of yellow brick road leading down. It's kind of like following Hansel and Gretel's breadcrumbs down the way, and improving the landscaping. So that's where a lot of our focus is going to be, at those entries in that spine, because it's just choppy. There's signage is like on a postcard, and the trees are beautiful, they're big, but they don't do a lot to accentuate the experience and bring people all the way north. Yeah. Any other questions about the marketplace? Yeah.
Actually, can we go back to the theaters? So have they chosen between the larger or the smaller option yet? That's
Those
still
are
on
the
table.
two different. There are two different. We're down to two, and they
Okay.
each have a different size.
So what were the two different amounts of theaters in the two?
So one's like a 60,000 square foot theater, and the other's like 43,000 square feet. On the 43,000 footer, because it is so small, it'll give us an opportunity to carve out for a better placemaking plaza with a water fountain or whatever ends up being out front, or a fire pit, and then you add some restaurant space in the front wall. It's quite a bit smaller than the current building footprint. So that's the two. It's 60 versus 40 essentially.
You don't know how many theaters each one could hold?
Oh, the screens?
Yeah, screens.
I think it's a difference between 12 and like 16, as I recall.
Yeah, and so what are going to be the determining factors for them to decide? Because to me, I would like that because I like the idea of having some of those entertainment type things in front of it. It looks just a
Absolutely.
lot, I don't know, it just looks cozier. But what are they thinking about when they're making that decision?
So it's, I mean, and again, if we went to 60,000, we'd still add some more articulation in the front. So it's not going to be the same blank wall, but it's an economic consideration. It's how much rent can each one of them pay, what's their credit. Because of the challenges in the theater industry, we want to make sure we hitch our wagon to the right horse. Who's going to be here for the long haul? Who's got the best business plan? Who's going to bring the best offering? And then it all kind of goes in the cauldron that you mix around, and Utensky will decide where we want to invest these dollars. So I wish I could tell you right now. All I know is that they're in the throes of those negotiations. We, as their development consultant, are supplying them with a bunch of information as it relates to cost, the cost implications of small versus large, because both require significant investments, and they're in the process of those negotiations.
I'm sure you'll let us know as soon as you know. So
I
thank you.
will. Any other questions about the marketplace? No? Okay. Anything else, Debbie, from staff? Want me to cover? Or Jim? Okay. All right. And then for the Huron Center, I'm going to cover the first part of the Huron Center, and then Erica Vester, who's our development manager on the project, is going to come up with the construction update. So, the Huron Center. This is the beauty that we started working on in 2011, and we've come a long way. But just to give, for those of you new council members, some background, this property was developed in the late 70s as an Albertsons anchored shopping center. It was developed by the Antonov Company, and initially had, I think, an Albertsons and was it an Osco drug? Was that the original that was in there? Yeah, that's right. And who knows what my aunt and uncle were doing in Northglenn High School at the time, but that's where they went to school. So, as you know, about over 10 years ago, Albertsons went out of business, and back up. In the intervening years before Albertsons went out of business, a structural problem was introduced into the center, and that was the ownership was bifurcated, it was split. And what happened is the anchor box ownership was separated from what we call the wings. The shops on the west, the shops on the east, and then the two little out parcels. I'm not sure exactly when that ownership division took place, but it had long-term implications for how this all ended up playing out. Because when we showed up at the stage in our first iteration of this deal, the box was owned by a group out of Florida called Kin Properties, and they had owned the Albertsons building as a triple net, just an investment property, and they were just coupon clippers. They just bought it and were getting checks every month. And then there was the Miller Family Partnership, was a family group who had owned all the rest of the center. And the problem that happened was over 10 years ago, Albertsons went out of business, but they still were paying rent under their lease. And so the problem is the guys out of Florida who owned the box were hunky-dory because they were still getting their checks and they lived in Florida and they could frankly give a rip about Northglenn and what was going on. Meanwhile, the Miller Family Partnership owned all this property around it, and they started to lose tenants, or frankly just traded down tenancy because they no longer had an anchor. And so you had a mismatch of interest in the center because you had one owner who was collecting coupons and didn't probably even know where Northglenn was on a map. And then the other owner was kind of in the weeds, but they were kind of driving a sinking ship. So back in 2011, we worked with NERA to try to, we assembled the whole shopping center. We had a comprehensive redevelopment program. We had incentives in place, and the anchor was going to be H-Mart, which was an Asian grocery concept. It was going to take the whole box. And in December of 2012, that deal fell apart because H-Mart, I will not use expletives, decided to go a different direction and decided to end up in Westminster at 92nd and Sheridan. And every time I drive by, I flip them off, but that's a different story. So after that deal fell apart, the Miller Family Partnership went into bankruptcy, and they ended up losing the property and went to foreclosure auction. And a group called Impala Capital bought it for a song out of foreclosure. And so they owned the center around, and to their credit, they did the best they could. They leased it up to the tenants who they could lease into it. They didn't put a lot of money into it because they didn't have an anchor tenant, and they were kind of just managing it for what it was, a distressed property. And they did bring some tenants to the table. Whether the neighbors loved the tenants is a different story, but they did bring tenants to the table. But Kin Properties remained the owner, but what eventually happened is the lease for Albertsons terminated on its own. It expired, and so all of a sudden their motivations changed a little bit because now they were no longer just collecting their rent checks. They had property tax payments due, and they had no revenue coming in. And that's the point at which NERA stepped in and negotiated and acquired this building back in, was it 2014? Yeah, 2014. And that was obviously very important because that was the point at which the city took its hands into its own destiny and acquired that property. And controlling this was very important because of CC&Rs. And so going back to the issue with the marketplace, here the CC&Rs for this shopping center are controlled by this box. And if you control this box, you basically control what can go in the rest of the property. So NERA acquired it, went through an RFP. We were the biggest losers or biggest winners, however you want to look at it, on that RFP. And our proposal, these are the beautiful pictures that you guys may remember driving by. But our proposal was to divide the box. And we didn't know exactly who the tenants were going to be, but to divide the box, reskin the facades, redo all the parking lot, and our deal with NERA was actually a pretty simple one. If you sell it to us for a very low price, we won't take any revenue on the back end. We'll put up all the money, and rather than putting money into the old infrastructure, we'd rather put the money into new stuff. So that was a trade-off that NERA and the city had to make. Would you rather get all your money out that you just spent buying it from Kin, or would you rather those same dollars go towards the facade, the parking lot, the landscaping, and everything else? I think, I'm biased, but I think NERA made the right choice. Let's put those dollars into changing the nature of the center versus just basically backfilling, old, infrastructure. And so this was the vision that we put forth, with our architects, which was not only redoing the re-facades of the box, but also redoing the facades of the wings, redoing all the parking lots, redoing the landscaping, and changing the trajectory of the center from one of continued dilapidation into a reinvigorated property. So, let's see here. There we go. So this was the original Plan A that we presented to NERA. At that point, we were planning on getting 2 different pads in the underutilized parking lot. Adding landscape islands throughout. A main entry feature. Adding some patios potentially to the end, making some connections. And our strategy was at that time was to actually try to incorporate and acquire the Impala property and then fold that into the deal as well. And then we were thinking of doing grocery and fitness at the time, was our target tenant mix. Secure 2 pad users, lease up the shops, close escrow with Impala and NERA, try to acquire the whole thing together, vacate the existing tenants and redevelop the shopping center. That was our original plan that we kind of started in 2015. What ended up happening is this pad ended up needing to get folded into the stormwater mitigation that Debbie mentioned, where some ponds and underground stormwater facilities were installed so that the flooding that was happening, from the west through the property to the east would be slowed. But we were able to secure a freestanding pad user out in the parking lot. Initially, we had to deal with a different user, but Nura decided that they preferred Arby's. So we switched horses and we went with Arby's, which I think was a good decision. They've been a great partner. And then we started leasing up the box. And we have been always focused on the grocery piece. We've talked to every grocer in town multiple times. And it's always been a challenging site from a grocer standpoint, because you've got King's and Safeway up the hill at Federal. You've got Walmart and King's on the other side of the freeway. But we feel fortunate in that we were able to negotiate a deal with Save-A-Lot, which is operated by Lever's Supermarkets. So they're a local family-started company that's now an ESOP. It's an employee-owned company. They've got about 20 stores, and they're actually fascinating because they do grocery like the old school way. They've got an actual real deli. They've got a real butcher on site. They've got a real bakery. And some of their stores actually have a tortilleria where they make fresh tortillas. You can bring them home. And so we negotiated a deal with Save-A-Lot, and they're interesting because Save-A-Lot's a small family-operated company. They still tailor each one of their grocery stores to the neighborhood, and so it's when you deal with King Supers or Safeway, these big national companies, they're kind of limited with their buying because they're buying for a region. They're not buying for an individual store. But Save-A-Lot works really hard to tailor their merchandising to the local customer, and because most of their product is their own brand, kind of like Kirkland at Costco, they can drive prices that are actually cheaper than Walmart, which makes them very attractive for families who are operating on a budget. The other thing that surprised us is while we were in our discussions with numerous fitness chains for the western part of the box, we were approached by AutoZone with a very unique proposition. Most AutoZone stores, as you know, they're kind of small, little 7,000 square foot buildings. They tend to be up on the street. But AutoZone was in a competitive search for what they call a mega hub. And a mega hub store is there's one store per market, and they use that for their same front end sales, but they also use that to service, to distribute specialty parts, not only to customers through the front door, but also to dealerships, to auto mechanics, and to their other stores within the region. So if you need a muffler for a 67 Chevette, this is the one place in town you're going to be able to drive to and actually get, and they'll have it. You don't have to ship it with Amazon. You don't have to wait a week to come from Napa. You can drive here and get it. And so they looked all over the whole city and decided that Northglenn was the best location for them to have this hub store. And for us, I know Save-A-Lot and AutoZone may not sound exciting, but I'll tell you for a retail nerd like me, this is a dream lineup in the e-commerce world we live in, because this is the most internet-resistant tenant lineup that you can come up with. You've got a grocery store who is catering to the most affordable price point that exists, and they will, because of their pricing, they're not going to be subject to the Amazon Whole Foods vortex that's slowly eating everyone else alive, that's eating Kroger alive, eating Safeway alive. And they're nimble, they're local, and they tailor their food offering to the local customer. So I really, really like that. I think of any grocery store concept, they're the ones who are going to be this. We look in 20 years, still thriving. And Save-A-Lot's also thrived in recessions, in expansions. They've done consistently well in every single cycle, every single one here locally, because they're great operators. And then AutoZone I love because this store is not just a store. It fits within their distribution model for them as a whole chain for the region, and helps them fulfill specialty parts, even through the internet. And so I love the fact that we're signing leases with two tenants here that I don't think they're not going to be flashes in the pan. These are two users and with business models that are, I think, going to succeed despite the internet and not be infected by it. And I love Arby's. I love the diversification that Arby's brings to the food offering on 104th. they're going to do really well with the proximity to Northglenn High School. So this is what we ended up with. And instead of acquiring Impala, we ended up entering into a redevelopment agreement with them. So took a little encouragement and a shot across the bow by council, but we got them to the table. And we're able to sign that redevelopment agreement, and since then they've been pretty good. You know, I think they've done everything they said they were supposed to do, and they've been paying their bills, and you know, and it's not been easy for them and their tenants. It's been pretty disturbing to a lot of their tenants, but they've hung in there. You know, we finalized leases with Save a Lot and AutoZone. We've secured our one pallet user with Arby's, and we're in the redevelopment of the shopping center with new parking, new facades, new stormwater improvements. You know, new roof, new HVAC, utilities. We did environmental mitigation. That is something that we should bring up. It was an important piece of this deal. Is when we went through our environmental investigations, we found out that the prior contamination from the old dry cleaner here on the west side had actually migrated across the site, which was causing vapors from those dry cleaner chemicals to come up through the slab. And so what we did within our box, it's actually a pretty interesting exercise. We took that existing slab and we Swiss cheesed it with a bunch of trenches at regular intervals across the building laterally, and then installed in those trenches pipes with like porous pipes that have holes in them and in gravel, so that the vapor comes up, goes through the pipes, then they run to the demising wall, and they run up out through the top of the building, which is a really neat way to address an environmental problem and make sure that all the customers for the long haul are obviously safe in those two buildings. You know, Arby's is putting a vapor mitigation system in their new slab, so that's easy to take care of. So that's it. So before I turn the time over to Erica on the more detailed construction update, does anyone have any questions about the deal today? Yes, Rosie.
Is the pad south of the bank off the plan?
It is. It's off the plan. This was one of the sacrifices to the Public Works Department. It went on the altar of the stormwater god and got killed. So yes, that is where we have a new beautiful pond. Does not generate revenue, but it's going to be a great pond, and you can't swim there.
I have another question,
Yes.
and I'm going to throw you for a loop here.
Absolutely, I'm ready.
I'm back to the marketplace. Sorry.
Sorry, we don't take any more questions for that. I'm just using Rosie. Marketplace, yes.
The monument sign on the corner of 104th and I-25 that was from the original Northglenn
Yep.
Mall, is that going?
That's going to be definitely. I don't know if it's going to be going, but it'll be redone. It'll be.
There's some historic value to that,
Yeah,
at least in
absolutely.
my heart.
Yeah, so it's not going to be demolished. It'll be at least incorporated in the new kind of color scheme and the graphics, but it's not going to go away. And if there's historicity that we need to be taking into account, we certainly can.
Okay. It's from the original mall.
I think, if I might add, Rosie, the technology now in that sign is outdated, so they definitely will have to change the technology
Yeah.
that's in that sign.
Yep.
It's just two pillars, is what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
That's right. Any more curveballs?
No.
All right.
I'm good, thanks.
Right. All right. Other questions? Yes.
I don't have questions, but I've said it before, but I just really appreciate that you hung out with us on this Huron Center. I mean, I know it was a tough thing, and it's a thorn in all of our sides.
No,
but
listen, it's great.
you coming back to the table and helping us is just huge. And
It's kind of like
I
my
think we
wife
all
having
need to
kids.
appreciate
She
that.
forgets how bad it was. You know, it's after it's over. Oh, this is great. You know, we should have done this 3 years ago. But no, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. It goes both ways. It wasn't just us sticking in there. It was Debbie and staff sticking in there, and you know, we had a fun partner to wrangle with. But you know, it's all worked out.
Yes, thank you.
I'm just glad that the economic cycle has kept up long enough for us to pull this thing off.
Hold on.
Yes.
Are the wings fully leased?
No, they're not fully leased. There is some vacancy there, and I'll tell you, the Impala guys are obviously very anxious to get the current tenants in there to get back up and operating and stable, and I think they'll all do much better. I am quite certain they're probably also very anxious for those leases to roll because they're making a substantial capital investment, and and hopefully, for the tenants that are good operators in there and providing needed services, that their business will have risen because of the anchors, because of all the improvements, and they'll be able to afford increases of rent. And for those that don't, they will hopefully be replaced with other, operators who can. But that's just to be part. It's kind of the redevelopment of any old center. The tenants who can take advantage of the redevelopment will better their business, and their bottom line will go up, and so they'll be able to afford rent because rent's just one component in their P&L, and if their top line goes up, then they can afford more bottom line. But for those who don't, who maybe have more marginal business models, they'll probably be replaced, and that's probably not a bad thing because you'll get better quality operators in there. Yeah.
Any other questions?
All right, so Eric, I'll turn this over to you. Erica's been in the weeds out there almost every other week. It's just the roller down on the construction, so she'll be able to walk you through the details of physical plans.
All right, well, Mayor, Council, this is the first time I'm in front of you, so thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here to give you guys some construction updates. I have not been involved in the project as long as Tyler, but I really do feel lucky that I've been able to come in at the time that we're actually seeing it come to fruition. So I don't have any pictures of the interior, so I think I'll start there. Tyler talked about the vapor mitigation system. That's all been installed inside our AutoZone and Save-A-Lot space. The demising wall is up, and we're finished with all of our work inside the building. There's a little bit of dry utility work that needs to happen for Save-A-Lot, but that'll be finished up here in the next week. So then they'll be able to be delivered and start as soon as they can. AutoZone is in there. They have completed most, if not all, of their demolition and actually put up some of their interior walls, so they're definitely moving. This picture right here is kind of the northeast portion of the property, and that's where the pond that Tyler mentioned is going to be going, and then right behind it, our underground detention area. This right here, this big dirt pad up at the north part of this picture is the Arby's pad. And so if you go out there today, you'll see that they're out there working. There's a lot more happening. These pictures were taken about a week and a half ago or so. So I definitely encourage you, some of these pictures are a little outdated because there's a lot happening every day. So please, if you are out and near there, go by and see what it looks like today. But our front parking lot is all complete. Almost all of our landscaping is complete. You can see in the back of the photo is our new pylon sign along 104th. And then I don't know if there's a picture in here, but our pylon sign along Huron is also installed. And that big orange stuff, that's going to be our big vault that's going underground, the underground detention, so it's kind of fun to see. So this is our front parking lot. This is all taken from the roof of the AutoZone building. All of the improvements, in the tamale kitchen and then the building just south of the tamale kitchen have been complete.
Can you talk about the accessibility improvements? I think it's important.
Yeah, so there were some new ED ramps that were installed. There was a lot of stuff that I think was discovered after the plans were initially complete, and a lot of it was happening over by the tamale kitchen. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Yeah, so that's all been installed, and really, we weren't meeting, I think, the requirements, and so it's really good now, safe there. So those were some good improvements.
What's in the building just south of the toilet or something? It's empty. It's empty.
Yeah, that's the former Quiznos back in the day. I don't know, Debbie, what happened to that one restaurant that was looking at it?
Wildwood Subs was in there for a short period of time and closed. That's the last business.
Wasn't there another new concept code that was looking at it a while ago? Some sort of like bar, not bar, but like brewery group kind of place?
They were, but they were actually looking at the west side of the existing.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, got it.
And before that, it was the Beach Bar. Not to forget that.
Yes. Flash of brilliance.
So this is just another view, kind of looking over towards the west shops and the front of the AutoZone building. This is behind our building, so this is behind the west shops from the AutoZone building, and so our parking lot behind there has been paved pretty much up to about this point. And I think the next picture shows you kind of, it's a little messy up back there right now. We've completed all of our underground work back there. But we did have some delays. We encountered some utility conflicts that just caused us to not be able to get that portion completed as fast as possible, but it's all complete now. Now we're just a little bit up against the weather to get it paved, but hoping to have that completed in the next 3 weeks or so. And then this is looking at our east end shops, and so you'll see the parking lot is all torn up here because this is where our underground detention is, underground stormwater detention is happening. We have that looking to be completed in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then the final portion, I guess, that would still be outstanding is our final tie-ins to Huron. And so I know our contractor is still working with the city. It's complicated because we'll have to, close the street, and there'll be some, just conflicts, and so that it's not as easy to just kind of go out there and do. So, but total completion, that'll be the last kind of piece before we're off the site, and so we're hoping to have that be completed by mid-March, I'd say. The facade improvements, so definitely go out there next week. We're hoping that all the tile will be up. We have all the louvers, which are these kind of panel type things. Those are all in. This is looking at the front of the AutoZone and Save-A-Lot and those east shops. So that's the AutoZone and Save-A-Lot box. I know the city of Northglenn reached out to us to see if we wanted to put in some bike racks. So we're actually going to be putting them in kind of on that corner right over there on the right side of the picture. And then this is the west end of the center, and all this white part will be tile. And that's pretty much it.
I think one here, perfect. Mm-hmm. So one of the other things we're looking at doing, and Debbie will be in touch with this, is trying to also come up with a unified sign program, especially for all the shops, so that they've got common signage that fits in well with the architecture. So we've got some ideas on that we'll want to discuss with you and Impala. And I think the other great way to end the presentation is that Erica's been kind of crunching the final numbers from all the costs and the change orders. It looks like the NERA portion of the budget is going to come under budget by not like millions, but it's going to come under budget by 6 figures, which is good. We did a good job budgeting up front, and we're getting what we hope to get. And so we'll be in touch with them by the next week on kind of final cost reconciliations as we get towards the end here. So that's questions. Yes, Rosie.
I always have a million of them.
No, that's right.
Is it going to be Huron Center or Tyler Center, or what's it going to be called?
Center. Maybe Erica Center, though. Oh. That's been in strong contention for a while. But no, we never, I think, reached a resolution on that one way or the other. So, right now inertia is carrying Huron Center forward, but I'm not married to it. I haven't gotten the tattoo yet, so there's still time. If the city and Impala wanted to go one direction or another.
Rosie has an opinion. What's your opinion?
Always.
Do you want to keep it here on center?
Not until.
So we can talk real quickly timing. So Arby's is on track for a pretty firm open date in May. May 23rd is the date they've been sticking to. AutoZone had been hoping to open up in April, the other A month. In April, they got a little bit slower start, so that may drift into May. We're trying to figure that out with their contractor. And then Save-A-Lot is behind those two because they didn't receive their final kind of corporate approval from the mothership Save-A-Lot until a couple of weeks ago. So they're in their drawings right now. Their plan is definitely to open up this summer. They'll have a more specific time frame once their permit drawings are submitted, and then we'll have a more definitive track. I think it's safe to say that we'll have Arby's and AutoZone open up here and call it May, and then my guess would be that Save-A-Lot will be open in June or July, probably that time frame, which will be great. So and then again, as Erica said, our construction should be wrapped up here in the next probably 45 days. You think, Erica, by mid-March? Which I know will be a big relief for the existing tenants, and we want to thank them. It's not been without some hassle for them and their customers. So especially with the installation of the big underground ponds you know, the storage stuff here, it's a big project. Those big orange pipes are not small to install. So anyways, we're thankful that they've been great partners in this. Any other questions? All right.
I'd just like to add thank you so much for all your due diligence that you've put into these projects and stick-to-itiveness, I guess is what I want to say. But
For sure.
as far as the residents are concerned, because they've wanted to see action on these projects so far, so long, and it takes a long time to put all the pieces together, and it's years sometimes. And I just hope that they're going to be happy with what we've come up with, because I'm pretty excited to see us at this point. So thank you.
It's going to be awesome. And
Yeah.
I think we should probably think about some sort of, once Save All It opens, like, I know it kind of already open, but some sort of celebration or something like that. Because it's a big deal. I mean, the community's been very patient, invested a lot of money in this thing, and I think the result's going to be fantastic and much better than we could have ever imagined. Just again, to go back to the but-for thing, had we not been able to buy the property for the reduced price, what would have happened in reality is the parking lot would have maybe been overlaid, no new landscaping. The architecture would have been basically a paint job, not the wholesale. You know, the detention would not have been able to go in. So the attractiveness of the center is 100% better because of those investments, and we're grateful because it makes a big difference for the tenants. It helps us attract, you know, the users we were able to get, and I think it'll pay off for sure long term. It's a great investment. Yeah. Thank you.
Again, a special thank you to Tyler and Evergreen Development. We couldn't have done this without you. It's been a long time.
Yeah,
I started
it's worked
with you in 2011, so definitely understand that it's been challenging for you. A couple things I might add is on the Impala side, so the east wing, the west wing, and the pads, they are only doing exterior improvements, so no interior improvements are being done, like on the Albertsons building, so just to keep that in mind. Also, as you know, we got a 3-year EPA grant, and we actually, for the air quality testing, as well as the phase 1 and phase 2, we were able to use the EPA grant to cover all of those expenses. So that helped bring down some of the costs for the project. Both of the projects are going to be great when we get them done. It just takes a little bit longer to do, and I always tell people that redevelopment never pencils out on paper. It's never going to look right on paper. You don't make money until after it's redeveloped. Yeah. And we're going to see a rebirth of the Huron Center here, and we're excited. So again, thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you both. Thank you, Erica, too.
Thank you.
All right. Our next topic tonight is the Metro District Primer. Corey, are you going first?
You and I are double teaming again.
Okay.
Am I your driver?
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, I think this item on the agenda is the first part of a much larger discussion, ultimately about Carl's Farm. But tonight's component is really just intended to be a primer on special districts, and to a lesser extent, a quick and dirty discussion about financing tools, financing mechanisms that can be done within a special district. Again, you have my memo. That's a confidential memo on the creation of special districts and your approval process for a special district. As I indicated in my memo, though, rather than recreating the wheel, what I did is provided slides that were provided by the Developers Council, but they're a good way to both describe what a special district is and how they operate, and also to a lesser extent sort of differentiate between your role as the City Council in approving a service plan and what a special district does, assuming the service plan is approved. So a special district is essentially a special purpose governmental entity. It is a type of government that does particular things. In this context, we're going to be talking primarily about a special district as a financing mechanism. But for what it's worth, fire districts are Title 32 special districts. There are water and sanitation districts. Special districts under Title 32 have the ability to both build and finance improvements, but also to operate and maintain those improvements. And so part of the role of the City Council in looking at a service plan for the creation of a governmental entity that is going to exist entirely within Northglenn's borders is to decide what works for Northglenn as the area within which the special district is created. So in this first slide, it talks about what a special district is. And in this context, what we are looking at primarily is the special district as a financing mechanism. What does that mean? It means that ultimately this district will build things and incur debt in order to build them. And so part of the city's role in looking at how this special district over time should operate is, what are the constraints? How much debt makes sense? Understanding that while the debt of a special district only acts within its borders, the indebtedness is only attaches to the area within the special district, these folks are still going to be within the city of Northglenn. And so the city, as the approving body of a service plan for a special district, gets to have a role in approving the service plan and figuring out what those parameters are. So the document that a special district operates under is what's known as the service plan. And it is the service plan that the city approves after notice and a hearing. So it is that first step as part of a larger land use approval process where the city says, this is authorized. The special district can do this, whatever this is, can incur debt up to X, whatever X is. That doesn't mean that amount of debt is actually going to be issued. It means it's authorized. And the city gets to assist in deciding what services are provided by the special district. So the next slide has examples of the types of things that special districts, the types of improvements that are financed. I would also point out that, at least in some contexts, special districts also have the authority to operate and maintain some of these. Again, in the context of Northglenn, Northglenn's a full-service municipality. So Northglenn provides essentially every service except fire. So the special district service plan authorization that you may be asked to consider for purposes of Carl's Farm will be geared primarily towards financing the improvements, and those improvements ultimately being conveyed to the city. And we'll talk about where there might be exceptions to that, but primarily the idea is that once, for example, a water line is constructed, the question is, if a consumer of the city has a problem with their water line, do they come to the city or do they come to another governmental entity? And I think staff's recommendation ultimately is you want all of the water users in the city to have the same governmental entity that they are seeking relief from. And so that's why, in this context, the special district would build and finance the water line, but that water line would ultimately be operated and maintained by the city once it was completed. So special district improvements are financed by the issuance of tax-exempt bonds, and they're to be repaid from special district revenues. You keep hearing me say special district. What you don't hear me say is city. And again, that's fundamentally the distinction, is that the property within the boundaries of the special district is the property that is responsible for repayment of any debt that's issued by the special district. And so there is the types of revenue sources that special districts' debt is paid from. Antonio?
No.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I thought you were...
No, I'm having some issues.
Okay, fair enough. And then I think that the last bullet point on this slide is incredibly significant, and that is that the approving jurisdiction, in this case the city of Northglenn, is not obligated for the special district's debt. But having said that, the folks within the special district are going to have responsibility for the debt. So when you're looking at, for example, single-family residences that are going to have mill levies dedicated to paying off that debt, those folks still live in the city, but their property is assessed at a different rate than other properties in the city because they're going to have a line item on their tax bill for that special district debt. So they are in the city, but the debt is not the city's. The debt is that area within the boundaries of the special district. As I indicated, a special district is a government. It is a limited purpose government, but it is a government. So it is subject to all the same rules that the city of Northglenn is for things like public meetings. They're subject to the Colorado Sunshine Laws, Colorado Open Records Act. They do budgets after notice in a hearing. They're subject to the local government budget law, subject to the audit laws. So again, the same types of governmental functions that the city performs, a special district performs. But again, they are a special purpose government within the city. Separate board of directors, but they follow the same rules the city does as it relates to kind of their governmental functions. The difference is that their governing document is the service plan that is approved by the city council, whereas the city's governing document, its constitution, is its charter. So they have a different governing document, but same basic idea that they operate as a government. What we believe the approval process will be is that sometime in late spring, the developer of Carl's Farm is going to be seeking approval of a service plan that we're looking at roughly May or June, as I recall, for the approval. Why is that? Well, in part, special districts are subject to Tabor. And the goal is to get the district organized in time so that they can go to their eligible electors in November and get approval for whatever bonded indebtedness they are seeking. And the parameters of that bonded indebtedness, in other words, the cap, if you will likely be included within the service plan that's presented to you for approval. So that doesn't mean that that amount of debt will be issued, but what it does mean is that there are parameters, there's an idea of what the infrastructure is that will be contemplated within Carl's Farm. There will be various planning documents that go into that process, and the service plan will say, we believe it has this amount of capacity in terms of debt, and then ultimately, if the land use approvals are obtained for a PUD, for subdividing into lots, that infrastructure is built and financed by the debt that's approved pursuant to Tabor. Yes?
So who are the voters that are voting?
Good question.
If it's Carl's Farm, who are the voters?
It's going to be the owners, essentially, at the time of the election. So typically, the way special districts are created, there's very few eligible electors, 2 or 3 often. And then when you buy in to an area that is subject to a special district service plan, you see what you have that additional line, if you will, on your tax bill to show that you have a mill levy for the special district.
Okay, so I'm a little bit lost because you're saying that they're going to come forward in spring with a service plan. And they have to know how it's going to be funded. And you're only going to have 2 or 3 maybe owners on board, and they're the only voters.
Correct.
To say yes or no whether they want a mill levy at all.
Correct.
What if they say no?
The owners of the property, and I'm trying to, part of the creation of a special district is the developer has incentive to make this marketable. But they also have the ability to control how much debt is authorized, subject to service plan approval by the city. So the way the process works is the current owners decide what the capacity is of the property and seek and get approval for the debt. You're right, the ultimate buyers of the lots will not have had the ability to have a vote on whether that debt would be authorized. They buy into it. And then in terms of the procedure, and that's what we're, kind of the nuts and bolts, because Carl's Farm is wholly within the city of Northglenn, the service plan is submitted to the city, and it is the city council that gets to approve the service plan. Once the service plan is approved, the Adams County District Court essentially approves the service plan and sets an organizational election. And after that organizational election, it's recorded and the organization becomes effective. Now, again, at the time the service plan is approved, at the time of all these proceedings in front of the Adams County District Court, there are very few owners. And it is the owners that are essentially deciding and seeking your approval and then ultimately seeking court approval for how their property is going to be, my word would be encumbered, because ultimately that plan attaches to that property. And so it's an additional layer of government that acts as a financing tool to finance the improvements within that area.
So a quick question, is it the voters of that special district that would then determine what their board of the special district would be? Or how is the board determined?
Over time, the initial board is going to be the property owners typically. But over time, as more people buy in, and there's a mechanism where as the property develops and as there are more eligible electors, the board eventually becomes the people within the district.
So, Corey, initially, let's just say there's 4 owners.
I don't know, how many owners are there? Do we know?
More than likely be 5 board members.
So of the 5 owners that are seeking his approval, they remain the owners and they continue to call all the shots.
Correct.
And they own it now.
Correct. And then eventually, as the property is conveyed, more voters are created.
Okay, another question, sorry. So with the board, as it changes over time, at what point does it get dismantled or ever?
That's a great question. So this is a governmental entity. And so we're going to talk about what some of the services are that it may provide. But really when it is dissolved is when it has nothing left to do. And so, for example, if it doesn't provide any services at all, it doesn't maintain anything, there may be a time after bonds have been issued and maybe refinanced and all the debt has been paid off, where there could be a possible dissolution of a district. But realistically, I would suggest in most cases, not all, it's going to be a perpetual existence because there may be other things it does, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about. For example, if it installs landscaping, it may be that one of the services it provides is to maintain landscaping. That would be something perpetual in nature, where the district would continue to provide that governmental service.
I think I'm having a hard time getting past the voter part because I'm thinking back to the previous time when we had this conversation about a special district a few years ago. Do you remember that along I-25?
I think along I-25 was a special improvement district.
And
So
can you tell me the difference, like, because they had so many more voters because of the area, is
Yes.
that, okay?
And so that was an area that was looking at whether to assess itself for an improvement.
Right, okay.
And so it was one improvement essentially. You decide whether to be in the district and decide to assess yourself.
Got it, okay. There, thanks for that clarification.
Okay.
I was hung up on that.
Okay, wrap my brain around
On this. So we've got 4 or 5 owners of a particular parcel of property who's going to hold an election and vote for themselves to be able to be a special district and take on bonding authority so that then they can take out money as a government entity. So we're giving 4 or 5 residents the ability, property owners, the ability to levy a mill on any future people who live there, but they maintain all ownership.
Only until the property is sold.
Okay. But what happens as far as like any roads or anything that's actually built? Does that then become the property of the special district?
No. And that's what we're talking about today, in part, is that it could, theoretically, but you get to dictate in your service plan approval how that works. And what is contemplated here is that it would be a financing mechanism to build the infrastructure, build the roads, but then convey them to the city.
And then second question, I assume that anytime a new resident comes in and purchases property, that they're made aware of the additional mill levy on the front end so that they understand that it's potentially more expensive to live here than there, or I'm sure that it all probably evens out, but that's made exclusively here.
I mean, the answer is yes. Do you have to be a somewhat sophisticated property purchaser? Maybe. I mean, there is a different, in many communities, most communities in the state of Colorado, your mill levy is going to be different depending on where you live. And many, if not all, newer communities, if you look at your mill levy compared to perhaps older areas, it will have that special district mill levy in addition to the city one. And so in terms of the so here's the governing body of a special district, and I think those on the legislative committee heard a proposed bill. Right now, to be an eligible elector of a special district, you have to be registered to vote in Colorado and own property. There is a bill in this year's legislative session that would say if you own property, even if you live out of state, you should be entitled to vote. I don't know what's going to happen to that, but the idea is that in a special district, property ownership is what is the trigger for being able to vote. Whereas in the city of Northglenn, you do not have to be a property owner to vote in a city election. You merely need to be a resident. So that's a fundamental difference between being able to vote in a special district. So the owner of rental property gets to vote, the renter doesn't for the special district, but for the city, the renter votes. We talked about open records and open meetings. Special districts are also subject to the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act. So to the extent that the members of the board, whether they are the initial members or whether they're members in the future, they're covered by the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act. They are subject to the same constraints. We have the discussion in orientation about how you as the city council need to act within the scope of your authority. Much like that, the members of the board of directors of a special district need to act within the scope of their authority. For example, and not in the liability context, but there are several cases, one within the last 6 months, where there's this distinction when a special district condemns property, and special districts, just like governmental entities, have the authority to condemn if they need to build something and can't get the approval of an owner. Well, there are cases that say it has to be for a pure governmental purpose. So when I sort of feel your concerns, that it looks like you're concerned that the owners of the property are also the government to begin the process, well, there are constraints that say you have to do everything for a governmental purpose. You can't do it for your own private benefit. A special district's a governmental entity. When you are financing, you're financing improvements that are governmental improvements. So therefore, it is a special purpose governmental entity. So what are the benefits? This is fundamentally a mechanism for financing improvements. And then in the long term, to the extent the city authorizes it, it can be for maintaining improvements within a specific area. And I'm going to talk about one of the issues that's out there right now that I don't think has even been decided finally by the folks that are going to be bringing this forward, about options related to services that they may provide. But it also it addresses how the infrastructure is going to be built without it being a city cost. Now, that's not to say that to the extent there might be off-site improvements where this improvement contributes and the city's existing numbers contribute, they're not required to necessarily pay for cost of the city, but to the extent it's impacts caused by the development, this is a mechanism for them to pay those costs. There are a number of other slides that talk about kind of the benefits to the approving jurisdiction, additional benefits, and also examples of special districts. But I guess I want to focus on one area. I think fundamentally what we've been talking about is this being a financing tool. But, as I said, they do have the ability to provide services. Special districts do. So, for a long time, the traditional model after improvements were built is that to the extent that improvements weren't going to be operated and maintained by the city, they were often operated and maintained by a homeowners association. And it may be that there was another layer of government where the special district would still assess, and there might be a management agreement, for example, with the homeowners association. And the homeowners association was vested with the authority to maintain, for example, landscaping, common areas that may not be public. Different special districts are looking at different models now. Some still want the homeowners association to be the mechanism long-term, or a property owners association to be the mechanism long-term to maintain those improvements that aren't public. And some special districts want to do it themselves. In the conversations I've had with the city manager, from the property owner's perspective, homeowners association dues aren't necessarily tax deductible, and paying the property tax is. But there's also issues of longevity. There have been concerns across the metro area where homeowners associations sometimes go away. And so there is sometimes a benefit to having the special district be the mechanism long-term to maintain certain improvements that may not be maintained by the city. And I think that's one of the questions that will come up in this process, is long-term maintenance of those improvements that are not maintained by the city. And frankly, there are some communities that have allowed internal roadways to be maintained by the special district. That may be a question that you're asked. But part of that discussion, again, will be if you have a community member that comes in and says, I don't like the way my road is deteriorating or being maintained, whatever it may be. Do you want to be the governmental entity for all, where the one-stop shop, if you will, or do you want to say you're going to have to go talk to the special district about that particular street? It's one of the questions that you will be asked. So I'm going to stop here because that's really the primer on special districts before I go into some of the what the developers have referred to as the share the pain model. But I'm gonna stop here and see if there's any questions on special districts.
I just add a couple things.
Yeah.
So I think some of the things that you'll be faced with in terms of policy decisions with this service plan, and Corey alluded to them a little bit, but we have put about $150,000 into a utility study, which I think has really helped benefit the property to this point in terms of identifying, at least at a very high level, what the infrastructure needs are going to be out there. You've also approved a master plan as an element of the comprehensive plan, which identifies some maximum densities that you would be at least open to approving, depending on, of course, of quality and architecture and the other things you've got in the PUD. I think one of the big things that we're going to have to balance, from staff looking at it as well as your ultimate decision, is the mill levy that is placed on the property should have some kind of cap on it that matches the pro forma, in that this is the amount of money that is needed for the infrastructure for the project. And then also associated with that is, here's the level of density that is needed to be able to pay off that level of debt. And so there's a lot of levers that can be pulled back and forth there to make that happen. You can obviously have a very high mill levy with a much lower density, because the infrastructure number is probably not going to change very much. It could change a little bit depending on the final design, but most of the big ticket items, utilities, main roads going through there, are pretty much the same. Conversely, you could have a much lower mill levy and a higher density, because theoretically you're getting more units, you've got more assessed value, you're able to discharge the debt in a similar style or time frame. I think Corey mentioned one of the other big policy issues that will probably be coming out of the service plan is what infrastructure is going to be built by the district and then long-term maintained by the city. Water and sewer lines is probably a very logical one that we would still maintain. It's part of a connected system. Streets might be a policy discussion if it's something you want to allow the special district to maintain long-term. So they're just kind of some general thoughts to kind of maybe put a frame around what you're going to be seeing here in the next several months.
And we do not have yet a service plan submittal. So we've talked about drafts of what the plan might look like, but this primer, the timing of this was intended to be before there has been any submittal whatsoever, just as sort of again, a 101, if you will. Now I'd ask you to go to the page in your packet that's the quote-unquote share the pain model that I think is after what is a special district. And I like to differentiate between fact and opinion, and I'm going to suggest to you that there's some opinion in this slide. And that's why I started with this. Who provided this data? This data was provided by Developers Council. Do I agree with it? Largely. Do I agree with it 100%? Not necessarily, but it's a good place to start the discussion. And that is, this talks about all of the possible places that dollars may come in as it relates to putting together a complex project. So certainly the developer, we know the developer is going to be contributing to this project. What we also know, at least as of now, is that there is no urban renewal on the Carl's Farm property. So when you see TIF, probably not a component to this project. An urban renewal is not a component of this project. The tenants will have a Metro District component, as we've talked about, and then there is a possibility of the public contributing dollars through what's called a PIF. And part of the discussion about a service plan authorization are what are the revenue sources that are authorized within a service plan. And so when I say it's opinion about the share the pain model, there is an idea that there should be no public participation. If there's no public participation, the governing body has to decide whether it's willing to have a project not occur at that time. It may not be that the market's ready without some sort of gap financing, without some public participation, but from a policy level, if a project is as important to you, and if there is a demonstrable gap, part of the city council's determination is what type of participation do we want? And so in the...
Can you maybe elaborate or give me an example of the revenue sources that could be authorized in the service plan?
So the other one we're going to talk about, that's exactly the next slide. So if you go, or the next page, it talks about frequently one public finance component is not sufficient to bridge the gap. And so again, here, in addition to the mill levy, you've got probably at least two additional tools. One is the city has what's called an STIP, and that is where the city is authorized by its code to share back sales tax, new sales tax that's generated by a project. That is a tool that's been used before. It has one significant downside. It is subject to annual appropriation. By definition, a sales tax shareback, in the absence of an election, the city gets to make a decision every year whether to appropriate those dollars. Have I ever heard of a city deciding not to appropriate under a sales tax shareback? The answer is no, because no developer would ever do business with the city again. But having said that, is it a revenue source that can then be bonded against? Probably not, because it's subject to annual appropriation. But it is a tool in the city's toolbox that's available. Because of the constraints on sales tax sharebacks like the city offers, one fairly common tool is what's called a PIF. So we've talked about PIFs and TIFs, and it can be confusing. But a TIF, as we talked about earlier, is tax increment financing generated through urban renewal. A PIF has nothing to do with urban renewal. It is essentially a contractual arrangement that allows for an additional fee to be charged as part of a transaction. And so I think what's contemplated for Carl's Farm is some form of a mixed-use project. To the extent that there is a commercial component, a PIF is something that, as it says here, it walks like a sales tax, quacks like a sales tax, but it's not a sales tax. It is a contractual arrangement, typically, that attaches to the property through something like a recorded covenant that walks and talks like a sales tax, except that it too is taxable. And so in your materials, you'll see some, I think one of the slides had a sample receipt. And to me, that is the most demonstrable way to show the difference between a sales tax and a PIF, is that the PIF itself is taxable. So it is a fee that is somehow attached to the property.
But only through retail, right? And the PIF is only on retail.
Right.
So in a development that's mainly housing,
So,
not that big of a revenue generator.
correct. So we're talking about the commercial component of a mixed-use project.
Right.
Yes.
But it just seems it's not that much.
And so you'll see there's a slide that talks about the distinguishing characteristics between a PIF and a sales tax. And I would encourage you to look at that. I guess there's two final points I've made. One is that when you look at the slide for the legal authority for a PIF, PIFs are an accepted method of financing improvements in Colorado. But have they been challenged yet? The answer is no. There was a case that was pending in the lower courts a couple of years ago up in the mountains, where one of the challenges was whether a PIF was authorized. That case got settled. But the risk, frankly, is not to the city. The risk is to those people that decide to enter into the contract to allow a PIF. So to the extent that there's risk, frankly, the risk isn't the city's. And then there's two kinds of PIFs. And we're giving you all this data so that you'll have data points when we actually have a proposal in front of you. The terminology used here is what's known as an add-on PIF and a credit PIF. I've always used, instead of the term credit PIF, I've used the term pilot, which is a PIF in lieu of tax. Same thing. An add-on PIF is a percentage. Let's say we're talking about 0.5% that is on top of the City of Northglenn sales tax. So it's added on. Everyone else in Northglenn is paying X amount of sales tax. If you're within the Carl's Farm PIF area, you're paying 0.5% more. Whereas a credit PIF, or a pilot, PIF in lieu of tax, the city forgoes that 0.5% or whatever the number is, and essentially the same tax is paid within the PIF area as in the rest of the city. Now, there's a very, very slight difference because of that line item where the PIF is taxable, but it's essentially the same number. And so it's a policy decision. Again, it is a way in Northglenn, if you were to authorize a pilot or a credit PIF, it's a way to do what the city does through its STIP, but have it not be subject to annual appropriation. So it is more, in many cases, more palatable to allow it that way.
I understand PIFs, but what is RSF on this, on the receipts that they have here? What is that? It's a one, it varies on what it is, but RSF underneath the PIF?
I don't know, because I'm not familiar with the promenade shops at Centera.
Okay, so it's something that added to it. Okay, thank you.
Mayor, Council, those are my slides.
Oh.
All
right.
And, the answer is it's a retail sales fee. It's just a PIF by another name.
Oh, got it. All right, thank you.
And so you have, as one of your slides, selected Colorado PIFs. And you can see what other communities are doing, whether they are add-on PIFs or credit PIFs. You do currently have one PIF in the city of Northglenn, and that is a PIF at Webster Lake that is done through essentially the Property Owners Association that does the maintenance of Webster Lake. That is the only, or the shops at Webster Lake. That is the only current PIF in Northglenn, but you do have one. And so again, we sort of throw all this data out. Hope you'll keep the slides so that when we have the actual proposal on what the service plan is contemplated to be and what the revenue sources will be, you can look back at this, and then as we're talking about what the proposals may be, you'll be able to put it into context.
No, I said my piece. Thank you.
All right, let's open it up for questions. No, I have. So I'm going to use your thing that you always throw at us. What is the end game? I'm missing why are we doing this when all of the fees and revenues have to go back into the infrastructure? Who's making money? Where's the money going?
The end game is, this is a mechanism to finance the public improvements that, but for the service plan, there may not be an ability to do so. I mean, that's the end game.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think one of the challenges we have identified just from staff doing that infrastructure analysis is that with Irma, Race, 120th, major water and sewer, major drainage infrastructure, we're not so sure that the density you approved in a master plan would support the private funding of that by a developer. And so this is a way essentially for the developer to, frankly, shift that burden to future lot owners. And so you buy a house in there, if there's a certain mill levy on it above and beyond what the normal city mill levy is, then you're essentially paying for those improvements over a long period of time through your tax bill, as opposed to the developer having to write a check for all of it up front. Now, of course, they've got huge costs up front as well in terms of setting up the district, engineering, et cetera, but a lot of the actual physical capital infrastructure can be shifted down the road.
Well, I get all that, but I just feel like, is it maybe through the management company that comes in to manage the district? I mean, somebody in there has to be making money. So as Fox Run, and I told you, Jim, that we've been approached by somebody wanting to do a metro district in there. Why? Why take over that community now after it's built out? And I guess I just don't. I don't get the end game. I get it I get it at Carl's Farm, but how about that scenario?
Well, yeah, there are special district management associations that do collect a fee for managing them, but I think that in the developer's mind, probably it's to get the project done. And
Okay.
so Corey's but-for argument is right on point in that absent some way to shift that infrastructure cost burden, the property will not develop. Unless, I think we've looked at 1,200, 1,000 units on that property, unless you just go with literally thousands and thousands of units, Glendale style potentially, with high rises, or at least mid rises.
Well, and there's no question that developers want to make money, and and so the mechanism here is trying to figure out where that sweet spot is. Where's the sweet spot? And we have folks that help us with financial analysis to say, okay, is there truly a gap? Do they, there's a market rate, a market profit, if you will. The developers, they're not doing this for charitable purposes. But where's that sweet spot where the city should, as a matter of policy, decide it should participate? Developers make their money. The lot buyers in Northglenn have a burden that is manageable, and that everyone in that context wins. That's the difficult policy end game.
Corey, are PIFs being used more often in even smaller projects? And I guess the reason I ask that is that I think they're starting to gain more momentum, but the development that's the old Lakeside, that has a PIF with the Walmart and all of that. So I guess, are you starting to see that it's a little bit more of a used mechanism and acceptable by consumer?
Yes, my answer would be yes. I mean, I think PIFs are. There's certainly that. I mean, the question is, when you're choosing between going, to Park Meadows or to Cherry Creek, do you check what the receipt says?
But perception-wise, I guess, is a little bit more why I was asking the question.
Yeah, they are certainly common, and one of the cynic in me tells you that part of the reason they're more common is you can do them whether or not you're in a city. So you can, if this special district was proposed to be in an unincorporated area, you could still do a PIF. Developments in counties can do PIFs, and so because they're contracts, they are created by a contract, and so there's a lot more flexibility, and I do think they're becoming more common. And I don't think people look at the receipt unless the difference is significant. Brooke?
Yeah, I want to add just a little bit to the conversation regarding the Metro District and kind of to your line of questioning, Mayor, that you were asking, is that this isn't, a Metro District isn't necessarily a way that enhances the bottom line for a developer. Another way to look at this is that if you didn't do a Metro District and defer that cost on to the individual units down the road, what does that, if you have to pay it up front, what does that do to the price of the unit, whether it's commercial or residential? And largely what happens is that it's not market viable. So because you're going to price yourself out of the market if you front load all those costs. So part of this is also looking at what can get financed through a lender through a lending institution. And so part of this is really trying to say developers should make X amount of profit because that's how projects come together. They present that in terms of their financing to the bank, but then what they show is that part of how we're going to defer some of the infrastructure costs is looking at a district to help pay for that portion of the project. So I understand that part of the concern here is like who manages what and how that works, but ultimately this is really trying to figure out, as I think what Corey was alluding to, is that sweet spot, is in terms of how do you get a deal done that can get financed that's going to be market viable as well.
Any other questions? I have one. Sorry. Can you designate to expire or not expire? Okay, so you can set the terms up, or they would set, the special district
Well,
would set.
as part of the service plan approval process, you could certainly look at something like that. I think it may be hard to do so, but yes, you certainly could.
Why or why not would you want to do it? Could you designate it for CAM fees, like the rest of the CAM fees in a retail spot? So
Yes,
the PIF
and-
never expires, because there's always going to be CAM fees.
And that's precisely what Webster Lake did.
Okay. Great. Any other questions? No? Thank you.
We anticipate being back in the next several months to have you apply all this knowledge.
You did a very good job of me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Does anybody want to take a break?
Yes.
How about a 10-minute break?
Cool.
All right, let's reconvene. And our next topic is Connect Northglenn Final Draft Plan. I believe Brooke and Ashley and Jim will tag team this one. So. And somebody else? Oh, and Sam. I'm sorry, Sam. I didn't see you there.
Let me just make a couple comments about the 3 items that are coming up next here. I'm looking at this as a bit of our transportation sandwich tonight. So we have a high-level plan that you're going to be hearing about, the Connect Northglenn plan. And then at the end, we'll get in more of an operational thing with the residential street program and what our plans are for this year. And then in between, we're going to talk a little bit about all the other things related to transportation program and ask for some guidance on some of those things. But I did want to point out why we're here tonight. So some of you that were council-elect may have seen this on November 20th. So you were not in office yet, but we did present this to the city council at that point. And so it's gone through the process here. It's been through the planning commission. It's ready for city council to approve. And so we wanted to bring it back to you kind of one last bite at the apple, if you will, before we come and bring a resolution for you to adopt it, in case you have any final questions, fatal flaws, anything like that. So with that, I'll turn over to Ashley and Sam.
Sure, and I'll go really quickly because I'll let Sam, who's our consultant from Alta Planning and Design, cover most of it tonight. But again, like the city manager said, we're just looking to kind of build consensus tonight, make sure you understand what all the elements of the plan are, answer any outstanding questions you have, and just get it ready for the approval on February 26th. And I just did want to point out, I realized the memo wasn't very clear. The Planning Commission, because this is an amendment to the comprehensive plan, we did kind of cover this and have all the code language in here. But because it's being adopted as a comprehensive plan amendment, the Planning Commission is the adopting body, and then the City Council on the 26th will certify the adoption of the Planning Commission. And so they did, on January 16th, hold their public hearing and pass the resolution to adopt the plan. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear kind of where we are in the process. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam Piper, who's our consultant from Alta Planning and Design, who you guys have seen several times throughout the past year, to just give you an overview of all the elements of the plan and then answer any questions you might have. So.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction, and great to see everybody again. Hopefully everybody's having a good kickoff to the new year, and congratulations to the new folks on council. Just to give a little bit of refresher, the plan kicked off in February 2017, and we've made 4 presentations prior to the one tonight, specifically to council to walk through different milestones in the project. So much of the information you're going to see tonight, you'll have already seen, so I'm going to try to go through things pretty quickly just to kind of get people up to speed where we're at today. And if you have any questions, we can provide more detail, but again, I'm going to try to go through at a high level just to give folks a reminder how we got to where we are today with the final draft plan. So feel free to jump in with questions, and we'll have Q&A at the end as well. So again, my name's Sam Piper. I'm with Alta Planning and Design, and we've really been thrilled to work with the city through this project, so excited to be here tonight. So tonight, quick overview of the plan. There's a couple of questions that came up during our last council meeting, so we'll touch on those in a little bit more detail than the other slides. And then how did we get through project prioritization? And then the last chapter of the plan is implementation. So how do we take this project, which we've been working on for a year, and actually start to implement the recommendations which are included there. So folks, recall we developed a plan vision. We did that in coordination with folks from the city, both the public, our stakeholder group, presented this to council and then got feedback. So this is the final plan vision. In addition to that plan vision, we also developed supporting goals, and these have objectives as well. So it takes that overall big picture vision of where Northglenn wants to be in the future, zeroes that down a little bit to goals. So we have 8 specific goals about how do we get to that vision. And then for each of those goals, we have objectives underneath them so we can track our progress. We've had extensive public engagement throughout this process. We've had a couple presentations that detail what that public engagement was and the numbers that we were able to invite and get to participate. So we had both online and in-person public engagement. One of the key things that we used was an online input map, so that allowed people to provide feedback on their own time. So just some data summarizing how many people we were able to engage in the type of engagement for that. In addition to that, we had a series of stakeholder meetings. So these were both with city staff, with city council, as well as the Planning Commission and the HEAL Commission. This is the table of contents for the report. I realize the text is small, but you do have this in your packet. So you can just get a sense for what are the contents of this document, going all the way from existing conditions, what is it like to walk and bike in Northglenn today, and then going through the various chapters of analysis, where are our weak points, where are our gaps in the system, and then eventually to recommendations, how do we fill those gaps, how do we improve connectivity, and then lastly implementation, how do we start to build out a network and supplement that with program recommendations to build a culture in Northglenn that supports walking and biking. So obviously a big part of a bicycle and pedestrian master plan is developing recommendations. And we took a multifaceted approach to this process. So again, part of it was data driven, but we always want to couple that with in-person outreach and making sure that we're understanding what do people think are the weak links in the system. So again, it's data-driven analysis, public engagement, and then we draft recommendations as part of our consultant team, and then we work internally to vet those, see if we missed anything with our stakeholder group. And then we brought those recommendations both to council and to the public to, again, make sure that there was no red flags. Are we missing anything? Are any of those recommendations not consistent with what people think the recommendations for improving walking and biking should be? And then eventually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
So I'm looking at the survey results on that one slide, this is a couple back. Can anyone speak to, that one? So it looks like we're moving forward with a process that 36% said agree to. Is there more data to back up that need or desire for the community to have the biking part?
So what that chart is asking is we asked folks, do you think bicycling specifically is a convenient way to get around Northglenn? And 36% agreed with that statement. So what we can say is the majority of folks don't think bicycling is a convenient or easy, comfortable way to get around town.
That makes sense. Were there more survey questions? Are they in here too?
Yep, it's actually appendix, it's part of the appendices. There were 23 questions, and I'm trying to remember exactly which appendix it is.
Appendix C.
Appendix C.
And for the survey specifically, what we tried to do is understand what the key themes that we were hearing through the different questions. So while the appendix has a snapshot of the answers to every question, within the report and the public engagement summary chapter, we have a higher level graphic summary of what are the key takeaways from the public survey.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. So again, just walking through we had multiple rounds of review on the draft recommendations, and then we incorporated the feedback that we got to develop the final set of recommendations for the project. And these are the pictures on the side here, stakeholder and the public open house. Again, there's more detail in the document about the types of recommendations, but just at a high level, on-street bikeways, so if you think of striped bike lanes and also what are called shared lane markings. But again, more detail on those types of improvements in the plan. Off-street facilities, so Northglenn has an existing fantastic network of trails, and we also have different types of sidewalks in the community. So you can think of those off-street facilities as our sidewalks and trails. Neighborhood bike pedways, this is a topic that we presented at the last meeting, and we recognized that we needed to provide a little bit more information. So I have a couple slides that help to communicate what that type of recommendation is. But generally speaking, the neighborhood bike pedway is a low-stress, comfortable neighborhood street that's optimized for walking and bicycling. And then crossing improvements. So we've got large intersections along our bicycle and pedestrian network. So there's opportunities to make those more comfortable, safer to cross. We also have neighborhood crossings. Northglenn has quite a few instances where trails cross the street mid-block, and there's opportunities to enhance those crossings as well. So again, 4 general categories of improvements are included in the plan. Recommendations map, I realize this is small, but again, it's in your packet. So what you see here, the lines represent those kind of linear categories of recommendations, whereas the circles are the intersection improvement recommendations. Okay, so I can spend a little bit more time on this particular facility just because we got a little feedback from our last meeting that would be helpful. So again, this word neighborhood bike pedway, really what that's trying to communicate is that these are streets that we want to make safer, more comfortable for walking and bicycling. And what we've done, if you look at the recommendations map, is we're using our residential street network that are already have lower speeds and lower traffic volumes. So those 2 factors make them today pretty suitable for walking and bicycling. And so what we've done is in the short term, we're recommending lower cost improvements that can enhance the bicycling aspect of them and also the pedestrian aspect. And in the long term, folks recognize this, something that came up a lot, is that our neighborhood sidewalks are between 2.5 and 3 feet wide, so they're narrow. They actually don't meet ADA minimum of 4 feet wide. And again, that's the minimum to meet that standard. So in the long term, because there's a lot of streets in Northglenn, these streets can represent the priority network to reconstruct streets to bring sidewalks up to the standard. So again, we have a short-term recommendation for these and then a long-term recommendation for these. But to simplify the map, we're just using one line type. And, oops, sorry, go ahead.
Just a quick question on that.
Sure.
If we were to widen sidewalks on some of these areas, is that a CIP or where would those funds come from?
We'll cover that in the next conversation.
One-time revenue for one-time product.
Got it, okay.
As opposed to operating capital.
So what this slide shows is just the 2 different options. So again, short-term on the left, long-term on the right. This is included in the plan. Because each of these streets has slightly different traffic conditions, parking conditions, number of houses with driveways that front the street, we can't just have a one blanket recommendation. So rather, we've included these different kind of categories of optional improvements and then provided guidance in the plan for staff to understand which ones may be most appropriate given the context of the street. We also have more detailed specific recommendations for the street in a GIS file. So that's a mapped file that staff also has to reference those more specific details. But from a high level, on the left here, the short-term recommendation, and have people been over to Grant Street since the pilot went in, maybe just a show of hands? That's actually a really good example because it has both of the short-term types of improvements on one street. So one part of the street is striped bike lanes, right? So that's on the bottom here. And then in front of Stuckey Elementary, we have the shared lane markings and the striped parking lanes. And the only thing I want to emphasize there is that while the shared lane markings are for the bicyclists, by striping the parking lanes, you're actually creating more separation between people on those narrow sidewalks and where the cars are now driving. So while it's not a physical improvement to the sidewalk, psychologically you're creating a wider buffer space. So we do see this as an improvement for both bicyclists and pedestrians in the short term. The bike lane has the similar benefit of creating that larger separation. And then again in the long term, your residential streets pretty much have a consistent cross section. So we've provided some different options where you could have a larger attached sidewalk with those shared lane markings, parking on both sides. If parking could potentially be removed, then another option is we could have detached sidewalks. You could have a planted median. So again, just a few different options, but generally speaking, those long term is a reconstruction of the corridor with one of the primary goals really to bring those sidewalks up to the minimum. That makes sense? And then we just to provide some examples, this is Grant Street. So again, that short-term improvement, we've got a good example of that built in town now. And we did hear this. We had a grand opening event and we asked folks what do they think, and people really appreciated that separation from the cars. So again, share lane marking, striped parking lane, bike lane, striped parking lane. And then in the long term, these are just some pictures from some other bike-friendly communities. Alta has works across the country, so we're able to get some built examples of what the street could look like in the future. So on the left here, you have the shared lane markings, the striped parking lanes. This is planting strip or a tree lawn. Again, just providing more separation. The other thing is that it provides shade for people walking on that street, just a more comfortable pedestrian experience. And then on the right, parking on one side of the street, bike lanes in both directions with a wider attached sidewalk. So do those examples make sense? Okay, and then one of the other questions that we got at the last council meeting is just an example of, you'll see that some of our recommendations, it's one type of on-street bicycle facility abutting another type. And so folks were just curious, how do those transitions work in real life? So I just wanted to show on the right here on your screen. This is our grant. These are our striping plans we developed for the Grant Street pilot. And you can see that the bike lane, where the C is, transitions to a skipped line. And that basically cues the bicyclist to get into the roadway. And then they enter that shared lane condition. So that's how you go from a bike lane to the neighborhood bike pedway treatment. On the left here, this is what we call a buffered bike lane. So you can think of it as a regular bike lane just with a buffer. It just provides more separation from the cars. And that transitioning to, it's a little bit hard to see, but in the distance you have just a standard bike lane. So you can use the intersection and the geometry there basically to transition people into the space that they need to be as they make the movement through the intersection. Does that make sense? Okay, so in addition to those very specific recommendations on a corridor or intersection basis, we also have general recommendations that fall into these 4 categories. Working on these projects, what we recognize is infrastructure is very, very important, but in order to really make more people walk and bike, we need to create a culture that supports walking and biking. And so kind of the industry professionals have grouped these into the 6 E's. So all these words start with E's. And we have recommendations specific to each of these categories. But when we really boil it down, it's just how can we improve walking and biking through all of these different aspects which exist today in the community. So these are enhancing existing programs and recommending new programs that not just the city, but partner organizations, businesses, the general public can get excited about and engage with. So we have all these recommendations, and then we need to prioritize them. So we have 9 criteria, and again, this was presented before, the 9 criteria for project prioritization. And we used that prioritization matrix to score every single project that we recommended. And we grouped those into 3 tiers. So generally speaking, higher priority, medium priority, and lower priority. So the final chapter of the report is called implementation, and that includes 4 key components. So that's a summary of the pilot project. And the reason we wanted to include the summary of the pilot is it was the city's first bike lane, so that was an achievement that we wanted to document as part of the plan. And also it serves as a model for future projects. It was relatively low cost, and it was an improvement to that corridor. So it's a good example of how other projects could actually get built. Concept projects, I'll explain those in a little bit more detail. Funding sources, and then an implementation checklist. So again, Grant Street pilot project. I think folks have a good understanding of that after the previous pictures. Big takeaway there is we didn't have any big negative feedback. People were generally supportive of the improvement. Concept projects. So we had about 50 recommendations in the plan, and one of the things that we wanted to do was to just help visualize what some of these improvements could look like in the future. So working with the stakeholder group, we selected 5 projects. We just wanted them to represent a range of the types of improvements we have included in the plan, both from a facility recommendation standpoint and from a cost standpoint. So some of these are lower cost, some of these are higher cost. And then another key factor was projects that we consistently heard from the public. Oh yeah, that's an issue in my neighborhood. That's a crossing that's really challenging for me to get across. So we combined all of that to come up with this list. But again, it's just a sampling of different types of projects that we want to create some visuals about what it could look like in the future. So these are the 5 projects which were selected. And just to again, there's what we call a cut sheet, which is kind of a fact sheet on each of these projects included in the final report. But just to show what one example is folks know Melody Drive, right? It's 4-lane cross-section. Through the traffic calming policy, we've heard that there are speeding issues and there's a concern and there's a desire from the public for an improvement along that corridor. We identified the existing issues, and then for each of these projects, we created a rendering. We have a couple different versions of what that graphic is, but for this, we did a photo rendering of what it could look like in the future. And so stripe the parking lanes, go from a 4-lane cross-section to a 3-lane cross-section. And again, in the report, we include specifics about what the improvements are and why we recommend them. What's interesting about this graphic is we were able to use it, or actually I shouldn't say we, at the Melody Drive public meeting, and folks were given the opportunity to vote on different improvements that they thought could work. And this one, the rendering of this specific improvement received the most votes. So generally speaking, that's how we want to use this aspect of the plan as a tool going forward to help to communicate how we can make an improvement to the street according to best practices and then gauge the public interest in that type of improvement. In the report, we've also included several different types of implementation strategies. And I think one of the big takeaways, and we also included this graph, and again, the text on this presentation is a bit small. But I think the key point to take away from an implementation standpoint is that bicycle and pedestrian projects don't need to be funded as standalone bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And by that I mean if the city already has a capital improvement project, which is to reconstruct a street, the plan can be referenced and the recommendation included in that can then be brought into the design for that corridor and built as just an incremental cost on top of the already scheduled budget for that improvement. So that's one option. Another option is the city has a pavement preservation program. So inevitably streets are going to be repaved or restriped. So as that happens, you can actually look to the plan and say, okay, what did the plan recommended for the striping on that corridor? And you can make that improvement, but again, it's not the whole project is focused on just that improvement. There's other benefits to improving the pavement. So again, there's opportunities to do this as a piggyback on existing projects. And you can also fund bicycle and pedestrian improvements exclusively. Opportunities to that are to go after grant funds. So we've included a whole long list of state, federal, and local grant sources that can be used to fund bicycle and pedestrian improvements. Usually those require a local match. So another recommendation in the plan is if we can, as Northglenn, dedicate a line item towards implementing Connect Northglenn, we can leverage more grant funds. So if you have a 10% match, you can leverage X amount of dollars. If you have a 20% match, you can leverage more grant dollars. And then another factor, we just heard a presentation tonight where we're talking about infrastructure in a new development. And we do have recommendations around that property and potentially through that property. So that's just an example, not saying it will happen, but you can influence private development as a condition of getting their permits to potentially look at the plan's recommendations and implement bicycle and pedestrian specific improvements. So again, range of opportunities to get things built. Just lots of different funding sources, and that's just a list of the different categories there. So federal, national, state, and local.
And there's more in the actual appendices of the report.
Yeah, right, Brooke. This is just to give you a snapshot of the columns and the rows. All right, and then being the city's first bicycle and pedestrian master plan, inevitably there's policy recommendations that we have from a kind of a staff standpoint about what are the next steps and what is the data that we should be tracking to make sure that we're making progress on the plan and understanding what the impacts are of different improvements as they're made. So you'll see at the very end of the report, there's an implementation checklist, and that's literally a document that we've also delivered in Excel that can immediately after the plan is adopted become a tool for staff to check the different things that they should be moving forward on. And we've grouped that into different categories, so infrastructure, policies and codes, data collection, programs, staffing and plan integration, and maintenance. And then the next steps is to come back February 26th to present the final report for council certification.
And I should note, I probably should have put that in the slide, there's also a public hearing associated with your adoption process.
Set, or is that the public hearing, is that set?
For February 26th.
Questions, anyone? Marcy?
So we'll follow up to our ward meeting, our Ward 3 meeting. Did you follow up with the resident that was asking about the connectivity between how it funnels in from Grant and then it just kind of stops? Do you remember?
Yes.
You wanted to, okay, you did. Okay, and then did you confirm about whether or not we're not issuing tickets on Grant?
So there's conflicting, I think they have, but they're not actively right now. So.
And then, my other question was, they, one of the residents asked about Sundays with Immaculate Heart of Mary and what potentially could be done about allowing them to park on a Sunday. And I realize that could get really confusing for people. So I'm just curious if that's something that you all discussed and any resolution on that?
We did.
We haven't yet.
We haven't yet. I think that's one of the things that we need to look at when we make this go live for the whole street, is to make sure that we address that concern.
So I think I have to go back a little bit, and just so I can answer questions from the community as far as where this started, simply because I'm looking, only 130 residents were in this survey, so, and 75% of them are white. So I'm looking at the equity E and thinking we're not hitting that mark if we're getting 75% of 130 white residents answered these questions. So can we back up just a little bit and maybe kind of ground me in where this got started? And because if I have a neighbor who's like, what are you doing and where did that come from? And I don't know anything about this. I don't know if this is the reason.
Sure.
I might not be tuned in. And then second question is, what is our communication plan? In addition to the public hearing, how are we going to roll this out in a way that everybody knows?
So on your first question, this actually, the genesis of this is about 4 years old. We had actually had suggested this to council as a reflection of some of the feedback that we were hearing from council at the time about what can we do differently in Northglenn to help improve Northglenn. And unfortunately, we weren't able to actually deploy this project until the middle of last year. But I think to your question about participation, one of the challenges that we have with planning projects in general, especially like with zoning code and bike ped plans, is that unless you have people who are really, really interested in it, it's really, really hard to engage folks. I can tell you that one of the things that we've done with planning projects in general is we have really attempted to focus and enhance the community engagement and how we are reaching out to folks. It's not a perfect process, and also we have to keep in mind that we have budget constraints and other things that we try to balance with that. I think, so to that end, this was sort of an origin that happened years ago that took a little while to get launched, but I think it was a reflection of what some of the expectations we were hearing from council at the time. In terms of moving forward, as with all of our planning projects, and we'll go into this a little bit in the next conversation, is that we recognize the community engagement and the messaging vis-a-vis branding and outreach and everything else is an integral component to what council's expectations are, and we recognize that. So I think moving forward, we will clearly do something where if we're going to be rolling out like extending the striping down Grand Street, we would likely be rolling out information in front of that to reach out to the neighborhood and make sure that they understand what's happening in advance of that. In terms of the social equity aspect, I think part of the problem that we may struggle with is that the subject matter itself may not resonate with all socioeconomic demographics. However, part of this exercise, which I don't think we have it readily available, but we actually did an index that was socioeconomic and cultural and ethnic in terms of where our at-risk areas are, and we have special indexes that done that. And to piggyback with that analysis, part of our objective with the leveraging of funds is that we have identified CDBG funds to be our sort of catalytic element to help go after other grants. Now, there's a lot of layers to CDBG, and there's a lot of hurdles that we have to clear. The most important thing is that we will effectively be one of the first programs of this type that CDBG will be funding. And so there's a lot of issues about going out of census tract areas that are non-CDBG with the projects and how we address those concerns. And we're working with the Adams County staff as well as the Region 8 HUD staff on how we would actually implement that.
So there's so much in this project, and as I'm listening, I'm like, oh, I love that idea. Oh, that irritates me. Oh, I love that idea. And so I'm just wondering about collecting input along the way, and not just if this is, I don't know when this was collected, but if it was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, or if this is current.
No, all of this started in March of 2017.
The survey.
Yeah. The survey, the public engagement, the outreach that we did, the mobile meetings.
Out myself, I'm super busy. I wear way too many hats. I had no idea. So as a Northglenn resident, I missed the survey. There's no discussion in my neighborhood, my small little neighborhood. Nobody's saying, hey, did you hear about the bike path that's coming? Or hey, did you hear that this is an idea? And so when I look at 130 compared to the, thousands of residents we have, I just don't know that we've communicated it well enough. And when I look and I think, oh yeah, this map looks great, I think there's high need, dangerous areas that need to be addressed. And so can we gather feedback area by area, project by project?
I think we'll cover that a little bit in the next conversation, because I think really what we're trying to do here is set a priority with this exercise and really try to, the next conversation that we're going to have is really talk about how we execute certain things. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have all the time with planning projects is that, like we'll talk about a little bit here in a minute, but like with the corridor master plan, the part of the challenge was the perception was we were building what was in the plan. The plan was really iterative to suggest this is what's possible because this has been identified as a need to sort of give people context. And that's always the challenge when you're doing a planning exercise is that some people seem to think that if you show up, like with the Civic Campus Master Plan, we had concerns that if we had too elaborate renderings that people would think that's actually what's going to be built. It's a planning exercise. And so a lot of it has to do with the messaging that we put out there. I would also mention that for planning efforts, the type of feedback that we had statistically when we look at plan exercises, this is really good participation rate. And I'll give you an example. When we did the open house for the Civic Campus Master Plan that Amanda has been leading with the community engagement, we had, I think, over 100 people show up for that effort. Denver Blueprint sent out to 500,000 people about updating the Denver Blueprint, and they rented out this huge space down by the Western Stockdale complex. They had 117 people show up. So it's relative to what expectations that you as council have. We have actually, in many cases, on a lot of our public outreach, we've gone above and beyond when we've done direct mailers and things of that because of the concerns that we've heard from council. Once again, I think this is the planning. When we get to the next stage, I think we'll have more robust engagement as well.
Yeah, and I did just want to go over these in a little bit more detail. So I know we didn't spend a lot of time because last July we spent 45 minutes talking to you guys about all the engagement. So we didn't want to go through all of it again, but I just want to point out that the online survey was one piece of the public engagement kind of toolkit. So I just, and I know it does seem like a low number, but it's actually pretty good compared to projects. So, yeah, absolutely. No, I know, it's not perfect. It's definitely not perfect.
Yeah, and what I think what's also the strategy that we took is that we had the online input map in the survey and our mobile meetings and our in-person meetings, and when you hit a certain number, although we didn't obviously reach every household in town, we do start to see consistent feedback through all those different channels of information. And what we tried to do through the plan is basically where we continually heard feedback about different intersections or corridors in town, when we actually start to look at those corridors on the ground, we do see those issues. So by doing that different types of outreach, even though it's not this massive number, we do achieve that ability to see where there's consistent issues in town. And then we couple that with, because we know not everyone is going to be able to participate from every corner of the community, with our just, we need to look at every intersection in town and see if there's an issue there too. So it's both.
So I see 2 public open houses, 6 mobile meetings, more than 75 comments. Do we have the comments?
So in the report, there's a public engagement section that has basically the locations where individual post-it notes were placed onto our map at our mobile meetings. And then the ones where there was quite a few post-it notes placed, we actually have a note indicating what was the comments there. So we collected all that information on the back end. And really the purpose of the public engagement for this type of plan is to just have lots of layers of information that then we can use to understand where there's consistent themes. So.
Or can you know this, or maybe this is a better question for you, Jim. How does this compare, how does the public engagement piece compare in this project to what was done with the rec center?
So for the Civic Campus Master Plan, we held an open house that had, I believe it was just over 58 residents show up for the actual master plan open house.
But there were multiple points
We had,
of
but,
engagement.
right.
And so that's what I'm trying to compare is the.
I think she's talking about the rec center in Dairy.
Yeah, right.
Which those were
Okay.
100.
Yeah, so the rec center had a higher level of engagement than this. Also, it also had somewhat of a captive audience as well, because the folks coming into the rec center were informed on a regular basis of the event. But
yeah, I think we benefited with the rec center, as Brooke talked about, a captive audience. I know Amanda did a great job with her staff, of every single person that came in that door. They're like, have you filled out the survey yet? And where we had to kind of draw them out. They weren't going to a place as part of their regular business to do that. So it was higher at the rec center, but I would say it's a much different project though.
Yeah, and the rec center is going to be reconstructed.
Yeah, brand new one.
In the short term, relatively. So I think the other difference between these types of projects is this is a long-range transportation plan, and just because of the content, it's harder for people to have personal buy-in with what does that long-term mean for me today, whereas the rec center, it's going to be a physical improvement in the short term. I'll just go out and say Alta does these projects across the country. We're always looking for feedback like we're getting today about how to innovate with public engagement. We took a pretty multi-faceted approach with online tools, in-person outreach, going out to the public, not just asking them to come to us. And for a community the size of Northglenn, these numbers are above average.
And so when you guys come before us,
February 26th, Planning Commission sounds like has already given their nod to the plan. So if and when council decides to give the nod to the plan, it's basically saying we like this plan in the direction that we're going. There's not a fiscal component at this time, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right. And we'll dive into that a little bit more here in a minute.
The transportation program, the next agenda item, does kind of get into more of the specific funding. But yeah, this is more of a vision document that gives staff and council direction to work towards implementing the vision, but it's not a specific fiscal plan.
Great, thanks.
So one thing I want to ask, and I think it's probably out of the scope of this project, but did you guys remember receiving any feedback about increasing porta potties along the route? I remember a conversation I had when I was knocking doors, and one of the guys is like, yeah, me and my wife love to go out, we love to walk the trail, but I'm old and I can't hold it that long anymore. And so he wanted more, opportunities to extend his walking trips.
I don't know that we did get a lot of comments about lighting along the trails.
Additional public facilities like restrooms and water fountains, we really didn't hear much.
Yeah, benches.
We did hear benches. We did hear some of the older adults that we went out to the senior center when we did, a lot of them said additional seating along the trails would be really helpful. So we did hear that. It certainly doesn't mean it's not important, but no, we didn't hear that consistently.
I just have a comment. I really like that you continuously point out that we can implement this into new development, redevelopment, road programs. That's really great because we know we can't afford to do it all at once, and it's a better way to get people on board too. I think it's scary even for me looking at something saying, oh my God, are we going to put bike lanes all around the city? I'm not sure that I'm even on board, so it's nice to do it in pieces. And I also want to mention that when you did have the Huron traffic calming meeting, that was my top pick, the one that you showed with the 2 lanes and then the middle lane. And I'm not a big fan of traffic calming devices, so that one was really eye-opening to me in that I felt you could really slow the traffic down on Huron with that one, with that plan. So I was impressed. I like that.
Yeah, I think that's part of the conversation we have with the transportation program.
Conversation is that so many of our efforts that we do really can complement each other, and I think that's a way to implement it. But typically bicycle and pedestrian improvements, I mean, their primary purpose is to make it more comfortable for bicyclists and pedestrians, but they do often have the secondary effect of traffic calming, and that was actually one of the reasons that we picked Grant Street, was because we heard that there were speeding problems, and we thought putting the bike lanes would not only, I mean, there were a lot of reasons why we picked it, but one of them was because it had the secondary effect of traffic calming. So I think as we move forward with the traffic calming policy, we'll always take a look at whether the street has Connect Northglenn recommendations and see if we think those recommendations would also calm traffic. So I think that'll be, moving forward, a really good way to make sure we coordinate with the other departments and try and implement this.
So next up, this is just going to move forward for council approval.
Do you have a question? Or okay, sorry, I thought you had your hand. Okay.
Yeah, in the short term, we'll be back in front of you in 3 weeks, public hearing and then resolution to adopt. And then
as we continue budget planning for next year and CIP for multi-years, we'll be including this as part of our analysis of each street, really.
So the resolution is to adopt
Oh, excuse me.
on the 26th?
Yeah, to certify or ratify the planning commission's decision, yes.
It's an amendment to the comprehensive plan, so it's part of the long-range planning document that governs the future vision of the community.
Action or put money in any direction or say, go build that bike lane tomorrow.
Not much.
Yeah, not till we fill out all the grants.
Any other questions? No? Thank you all. Thank you, Sam, for all the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
It's a really great report.
Thank you, and I'd like to say it was great to work with you all as well, so
Thank you.
hope to see you again.
Are you all staying up there except for Sam on transportation?
It's Rob.
Oh, Rob.
Yeah.
Come on up here, Rob.
So some of you met Mr. Weber before, right? He's our operations manager, but he is also going to be our interim public works director after Mr. Willard's retirement in a couple of months, so.
Awesome.
Right.
So I want to try to, with this conversation, I want to bring something into it that was brought up at the retreat over the weekend that I think is going to be really helpful with the conversation we just had about what does this Connect Northglenn thing mean for an elected official? What am I committing to? What am I doing? So there was a thing that the facilitators put up, which was this sort of three circles that turned into a sandwich, which was setting policy or setting strategy, allocating resources, and managing expectations. And so in that sort of three pieces of that conversation, the setting strategy was the vision, the goals, the direction, and sort of, looking at that. And then with the allocation of the resources, it's the money, it's the focus of what you're doing, the staff resource allocations, and then what are the trade-offs to that. So this memo, and then the last piece here is the managing and executing, which is, basically, monitoring, adjusting, and meeting the expectations. The memo tonight is really talking about, and the next item you're going to hear after this conversation is the actual managing expectations, the execution of with the residential street program. So planning from by and large, what we do is we help you guys set policy. And Connect Northglenn is just exactly one of those things that we do, is that it's trying to establish a framework and a vision for what you want to see as a component moving forward in the organization and for the community. So what we have here in this memo is two other elements that are also sort of that visionary aspect here, which is the corridor master plan, the complete streets policy, which is also referenced in the Connect Northglenn. Oh, and there's one more piece here. The citywide streetscape improvement program, okay? And really what the first three of these things that we have identified under major project, which is we're all talking about setting the sort of the strategy here, feeds into what is a citywide streetscape improvement program. Now, one of the comments is, okay, well, when are you guys going to start building these improvements, or are you going to start building them? And I think in part of this conversation, what I think we would perhaps couch is that this citywide streetscape improvement program is really a matrix that's going to come together and identify where the opportunities are to create the synergies between, say, a residential street program, if we're doing a mill and overlay for a street. And oh, by the way, it just so happens to be one where we've identified a traffic calming measure. And so the idea here is really getting efficient with how we would deploy funds to maximize the value of what we're doing. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on these types of policies here. The corridor master plan, Jim was the original genesis of that when he was the planning director. And once again, for those who weren't here, during the 2014 retreat, we heard that Huron was important. We had the South Huron. The challenge is that we had something on the books that said, hey, here's some templates, here's some things that work. More importantly is that if we do South Huron, well, someone's going to say, well, what about Washington? Oh, and there's 120th. Oh, by the way, there's 104th. And so with the corridor master plan, what we were trying to do was, one, set some priorities and figure out how we would go about prioritizing them so that we could actually implement them in a strategic way that really resonated with the council. We brought that forward, and we actually updated it, refined it, presented it to council. Council had virtually no comments about it when we presented it. When it came to the adoption phase, the questions that you guys brought up tonight came up, and everybody was like, well, wait a minute, are you saying we're building this tomorrow? And it was, well, no. It's a guiding document. It wasn't the CIP plan itself. And I think that's lessons learned is what we didn't message well, was that very piece of it, is that it's really to try to say, this is something that you guys want us to go back and do what we're talking about here with this citywide streetscape improvement program, which really is a nice way of saying transportation improvement program. But it doesn't have the same panache as streetscape does. So with that, the other things that we have going on right now, which I think is a real plus because we're responding to what you guys are talking about and what you guys want to see happen, is the residential streets program. And I want to just once again, I think it's context for the new members, but also for the larger council, is that when I started here 6 years ago, we used the ADCOT tax, and streets went out and just said, that's the worst road, and we're just going to go fix that one road, and that's going to be a single project for the year, and we're going to go get it done. Then we basically started doing the pavement index survey, and then we then further refined that, and we used the LiDAR system, which is where the truck drives and assesses all that. Well, one of the things that engineering has been very successful in is that now we figure out, well, how can we improve the life cycle of certain streets? Some of them may just need a chip seal versus a full mill and overlay. And we've been actually able to redistribute the money and get more coverage over more streets in the community than we were in the past. So we've gotten really strategically smart, and all the while we're moving this forward. So we have the traffic calming and the school zone assessments, and really part of our challenge right now is that these are kind of things that are also operational, but we don't have funding for them just yet. But we're moving towards a path that all of this is happening. Yet again, we look at Connect Northglenn, and Connect Northglenn has identified 40 plus things that could be done. But if we go and do a mill and overlay and we don't restripe, well, we just lost an opportunity there. So in terms of an intermediate step with the Connect Northglenn, there's two parts I want to point out. One is that we're working with Public Works right now on their residential street program to identify opportunities that would otherwise require restriping, to make sure that if there is an opportunity, we look in to see if that's something we can possibly do. We recognize there's still a messaging component, and we want to make sure that that's integral to this as well. But we're already thinking in those terms, and I think that's the message I really want to bring forward with this. I think the other part of this is that with the school zone safety assessments, is that there's probably an overreaching opportunity to really say, are we deploying our resources, funds, as efficiently as we possibly can? And that is saying is that we know that we have a lot of concerns. We've heard that time immemorial about the school areas and that the parents are driving fast. The signs that we put out at the beginning of the school season now is one of the things that we thought would be low-hanging fruit that we could just go and do. But are we really just doing triage? Or are we providing a comprehensive solution? And so when we come back to this issue of allocating resources versus setting the strategy, all right, because that's where we are right now in this conversation, is that this citywide streetscape improvement program is really probably an exercise that takes a look at what we're doing operationally against the vision that you guys have articulated to us, and trying to figure out how can we best execute that for you guys, and making sure that we're meeting all these expectations. Now, that's a lot to digest in 7 minutes, but I think it's that this whole thing about setting the strategy, managing or allocating the resources, and managing the expectations is really a good framework for this conversation, because when we look at the CDBG funds, we're trying to figure out a way to start implementing immediately without using general fund dollars. I mean, that was part of the strategy when we first presented the Connect Northglenn, is that would be an avenue. There's a lot of challenges with that, and I can guarantee you it's probably going to be a lot of brain damage for staff over there to try to execute that. But we are trying to get in front of your expectations and meet them, so that we're trying to be as creative as we can in the absence of a more comprehensive approach. Now, I'm also very mindful of the fact that elected officials in general have certain expectations that usually coincide with their time on council. And some of these efforts, as you can tell when we talk about the citywide streetscape program, this is something we're talking about doing in 2019. And this comes back to the conversation that we have about the work plan and what the current priorities are, and how we go about, putting them in the queue of what needs to be done. So we run into this situation where we commit resources to manage expectations with residential streets program, the traffic calming, the school zone assessments, because we've heard that's important to you. But we're doing that at a pace in which, if we had an opportunity to take a step back and sort of look at the bigger picture, we might be more efficient with the funding that we have available. And as you know, part of the conversation on Saturday was, well, I don't want to issue debt, so we'll wait 15 years to do a project, versus, well, I want to see something happen now. How do we make that happen? And this really comes back to this challenge that we have on a staff level of how do we commit our resources effective and efficiently while still meeting your expectations as an elected official.
Can I tag on to that? So I think thank you, Brooke. I think so. The ask, if you will, tonight is that we have a Connect Northglenn plan that's going to come back to you in a few weeks. We'll be asking you to adopt that. We'd be prepared this summer, Q2, to come back with the corridor master plan, and then follow that on probably in the fall with the complete streets policy. All the way along the way, we'd be looking at what do we need to put in the CIP for 2019 to start implementing some of this. And that then relates to the citywide streetscaping program. It relates to the traffic calming improvements. If you want to get robust with school zone assessments, if you want to get robust with Connect Northglenn improvements, that would be the time to fund those. And as we talked about on Saturday, we do have the 4 mills set aside for, well, it's designated by the voters for transportation improvements. So all of these things we're talking about are eligible. It's just a matter of getting those planning, policy, strategy documents in place, which then we can go off and run and do a multi-year implementation. So that's really our ask tonight. I would say that we're going to be talking about residential street program for this year, this spring, and so we don't want to lose those Connect Northglenn opportunities we've identified, or traffic calming opportunities if they present themselves. So I would say we're not going to just wait until 2019, no. but there's a small piece of it that we maybe can get done, some things in 18, but most of it's going to be 19 and beyond. So.
And to sort of put a button on or a bow on my commentary is that what we try to do with these exercises is to give you the foundation to be able to go out there and answer questions and message the effort and what we're trying to do. And I think the most important thing about all this is that we're trying to create a strategic, thoughtful process that you folks feel comfortable with when people come out and say, well, why are you spending money putting down for a bike trail? I don't like the way, the street lights over here work. And so, you know, this is where what we're trying to do is to help give you the foundation to be able to understand that you have a message that you can communicate to them. And I would echo what Jim is saying, is that, you know, these pieces getting adopted helps set us up to really help provide that strategic message for you guys as we move forward.
So I have a question, and I had a conversation with Jim about this as far as one of the concerns that I've had is that connection to the community and how we're getting input from the community. So I tried a couple of things, utilizing social media or trying to reach out to get input about certain things. Because as I knocked on doors, the two biggest things I heard were pave my streets and sand my streets. I've already had a conversation with you about that. So and you can tell them all day long, this is our our sanding plan. They don't like it. So it doesn't matter that you've told us 5 times, this is how we prioritize streets. But if those are the two priorities in a very informal knocking on doors, how can we, maybe we can try it through our ward meetings, but how can we get information from our community that's a little higher? You know, like how can I say, I mean, I can walk on every door and say, hey, how do you feel about your streets? And get that input. If I ask that direct question, I'm gonna get an earful because they had a lot to say about it, which surprised me because I think my neighborhood street is fine. So thankful that 104th got done because that was tearing up my car on a daily basis. And so I think I still am just kind of stuck on this. We have to find new ways to engage our community and say, so that we can help prioritize this. Because I go right to public safety where a lot of other people prioritize their own public property first. And so my streets are a mess, and then I look out there and go, really? And it was the streets that got the sealant on them instead of the repaving. They felt cheated. But how do we get that information? Because I don't want to say to you, that's what all Fox Run people think. Nope, it's just 20 people I talk to. That's not enough for me to then ask you to be actionable about it. Does that make sense?
Totally get it.
Okay.
I'm a planner, so it's a little bit different orbit that I work in. I think that there's a couple of thoughts that I would put out there. Is I think one, it's the context in which you're communicating or engaging with folks. If I was out campaigning, I wouldn't be saying, I think the city is great and I'm going to make it better. Most people go, what's your concerns? What's wrong? I'm going to go try to fix it. Okay? And I think when we talk about in the planning world and when we talk about what we're trying to do here is we are trying to reflect what we hear from the elected officials, which is we want this community to be vibrant. We want this community to be sustainable. We want this community to be able to recognize the changing trend of its socioeconomic demographics. So how do we meet that? Well, when you look at the connectivity and with healthy eating and active living, we have that component too. We've identified food deserts where we don't have access to things. So, well, how do you improve those accesses? Well, you're looking at people who probably are living or who are probably below LMI, who don't have a reliable source of transportation. So having a road isn't going to help them. Having a wayfinding program that says, here's where your resources are on a trail system may have more bang for the buck for that person than the person who says, I don't like the way that they're sanding my street. So I think it's really a question of what is it that we're trying to get from the community and how we go about doing it. I will say one of the great things about the Connect Northglenn thing that we did is we had an online interactive map that people were able to actually draw on and say, I don't like this. And then we had people who could actually piggyback and comment and go, yeah, that is horrible. So it was very effective in that sense. But once again, when you look at trying to reach all aspects of the community, well, those are folks who have access to internet, okay? and also who care enough to go to the city website to then drive down into a bike ped thing to want to comment on it, no matter how much we promote it.
Well, you touched on one of the kind of the core values or vision statements from Saturday was the sustainability, but another one that rose up, kind of bubbled to the surface over and over, was the responsiveness to the community. And so I think we just have to put those things together.
Yeah, and you know, I can tell you, I oversee code enforcement, and I can tell you that we typically, when we get a council inquiry, we respond within 24 hours. Many times folks don't like the response, but we do try to be responsive. And I will say that from an organization, I've worked with multiple, I think we do a pretty good job here. I think it comes back to, you know, when you ask for certain things to be responsive, sometimes the responses aren't what people want, but it is what it is in some cases as well.
I would add too that maybe part of our enhanced communication can be explaining why. Because the old expression, you know, people don't care what you do, they care why you do it. And so they might still not like the answer that we did a PCI study and that their street is not eligible for 4 more years. But it'll explain why we're doing what we're doing. And so great feedback tonight. I mean, I'm thinking about this, like how can we try to at least explain more about what we're doing out there and why we're doing it? Because then I think people at least will have the information, and they can still be mad or upset, but at least they'll understand.
They might be more engaged, because if I hear, like for example,
I'm not a huge fan of bike paths everywhere, bike roadway things.
But if someone says to me, this is why we did it, I can either say, like if the why is 130 or 100 white people said we should have it, that's obviously an irritation of mine. But then I'm going to go, okay, well now
I'm going to the next meeting because I don't feel that that's an equitable reason to make a decision. So, or if it's, when we add this, it increases safety for this many residents, and it, you know, changes this entire street, and it does the traffic calming thing, and then I go, oh, that makes sense. And then I don't get feisty, right? But I think the why is important.
And you know, I think because you just I'll give you great. So that was great feedback. So as a resident, I would say, because you say you don't like bike lanes. Well, really the emphasis of what we're proposing isn't the bike lane. It's really to try to manage and do traffic calming and make it a safer place. And also, you know, create some lane recognition, because we've heard that people have concerns about the safety and the speed and children in the neighborhood.
It also depends on the neighborhood though.
Right.
Because my neighborhood has really wide sidewalks that people ride their bikes on.
But
not everybody does.
So, but my message is that you bring your concern. Well, I don't like I don't like bike lanes. But the message is that it's not about bike lanes. It's about making it a safer street. And once again, you know, we when we present the Connect Northglenn, it's in the context of bike ped mobility. But really, when we look at this more comprehensive approach, it has more legs to it than just that. And I think when we're setting policy, that's really what we're trying to share with you, is that some of these things address multiple fronts, and it's really just about, you know, once again, the reflection of what we're hearing from you is we're trying to give you a tool that says, here's how you can go and execute that traffic calming concern. Because by and large, you know, traffic calming, complete streets, the school zone assessment, they're all aiming toward the same thing. But what we've done in the past is we've reacted to the immediate concerns and really trying to pull all those things together now.
So it's messaging and the why.
Any other comments? I have one. So I see where this would be a benefit when I look at what we did on 112th Avenue, because we addressed safety concerns there. We addressed a school safety concern, queuing problems, backup problems. But had we had this in play then, where we would be looking at bike lanes, whatever else, I could see how this is definitely a benefit, and it's the smart way to do it. It's smart planning to me, so I'm on board for you. So, all right, anybody else? No?
So in terms of what we have here as a recommendation, just so to wrap this up, is that our recommendation is to sort of bring back the Connect Northglenn revisit the corridor master plan and also then bring forward a complete streets policy later this year. So I just want to emphasize that once again, that's what we would be looking for consensus tonight as well.
So there are plans that you're just going to bring forward to us to
Plans and
discuss, just
policies.
like we did tonight. Is everybody okay with that?
It's good. Well, and I guess maybe just re-clarifying what Meredith was talking about, how does the public provide feedback on these plans?
So generally speaking,
Besides the Connect Northglenn, we heard about that.
well, I think I think that's something that we can work toward in terms of
Okay.
understanding what level of engagement you want. Anecdotally, my experience in the planning world is that the lights turn on and the toilet flushes. Most people are pretty okay with what your organization is doing, and it's only when all of a sudden you say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go do this. That's what brings people in. Is when all of a sudden they feel like there's a threat or there's something that's going to be taken away from them. And so, we can definitely do a better job on the messaging side, but the thing that has been a challenge, I think, with this community is getting people to engage, because I hear it every time we're in front of you, is that how do we get the folks to engage? Well, I was joking with the Civic Campus Master Plan is that we were going to raise everybody's taxes, 500%. I guarantee you we would have had a packed house, to do that. But, that's not what the message is. So we can definitely work on how we engage folks. And we would look to you for feedback on that as well.
I mean, is there like I'm not really sure what the use of the Citizens Affairs Board is, but is there a group of citizens that we currently have that we run this by?
So, in years past, we had explored the possibility of creating task force or committees that would basically do that. Through part of our projects that we're doing now, we've had those same committees. The Civic Campus Master Plan, the public engagement component has definitely had another committee. It's like, 20, 30 people, I think. Yeah, you're on it. Yeah, you're on it. So, I mean, those are exercises that we can also do. It's, it's a question of, how much, and we're happy to do that. So.
I'm sorry, they always have the chance to engage at a city council meeting and look at the lack of people we have showing up at those. So it's just getting the word out to try and invite them more to the city council meetings too, because we discuss all of this stuff in public and they're always invited to be heard. So
Yeah. Well, then also, how can we go to them too? I mean, I was never able to make a city council meeting because my husband was on city council and I didn't have a babysitter. So, I mean, how can we be innovative in that way of reaching out and getting that feedback versus always having to go to a meeting?
Well, I can tell you that I think Antonio physically dragged people out of their houses to do the traffic calming, because he literally went door to door and posted flyers in addition to everything else that we did for that. And I mean, we had, I believe, about 48, 50 plus people show up for that, which, guys, I got to tell you, that's a really good turnout for a neighborhood thing. That's really, really good. But when you say, well, how many residents are in your ward? There's probably 7,000, so 8,000, and right. So the thing is well, you had 42 people show up, but of course it was a neighborhood specific thing. But then people go, well, that's not representative of the constituents, and therefore I don't feel comfortable acting on this because I don't feel like the public has been heard. That's a paradigm we all struggle with.
Well, unfortunately, that's what they say. They say, I don't know what you're doing. They're making decisions without my input. They're doing things that I don't know anything about. And so when they say that right to me, I'm like, oh, okay. Just real quickly, the Denver Vision Zero, I'm assuming it's in this packet.
Yep.
As an example, but this is just a good example of marketing and explaining the why. The 5 themes in here speak right to people. I don't think we would need to have this much text and this much sad stories, but I think we can still focus on these are the why, the 5 themes of 5 whys that they move forward with this. And I think it's something like this, or something like you just said, gives a broader picture of the project's purpose. Because otherwise I just hear bike lanes. I'm
Right.
like, really? I gotta drive around those guys? It's gonna make me nuts, right? So this is different. This is all safety.
I was just gonna say, does that mean you gotta go buy a bike now?
I have a bike, but you know, like, I don't live in Boulder.
So I said this at the retreat, I'm going to keep saying, I think we really need to stop thinking about citizen participation as exclusively being in person. I think that the median age for our city is 33, and people have lives, people have children, people have all kinds of situations that they're experiencing. And so if we can be innovative in figuring out how we meet people where they are, instead of just always expecting that they're going to come to us physically, I think we'll be better in the long run. And I think one of the kind of central themes that I've heard tonight goes back to our communications policy. So Jim, I'm curious, where are you in the process?
We are down to finalists for the position
Okay.
at this point, and that's all I want to say. Paul.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, cool. All right, thanks.
I just want to follow up on what you said. I agree. I mean, I think the old joke is communication is two parts, sending and receiving, and we are only responsible for half, right? But the connections is one piece that is a direct mail, if you will, analog way of reaching people. But I think we can probably enhance some of that with, you know, links to custom websites or pages, because each of these projects have custom websites we've built, or, you know, the consultants have built for them. Trying to get people to engage, you know, more graphics, maybe showing schedules and things, or explaining, you know, on a high level why we're doing this. Social media, of course, is great. I mean, that's one way of instantly touching people as well. But I think there's a variety of sources, but I think it is absolutely, if people want the information, it's there. They just have to look a little bit.
Right, and I think I've said this before as well. I mean, really having videos available on social media that talk about our why and how we do things, I think goes a long way in telling our story too. And then just a final comment, I think the fact that we have a direct mail newsletter that comes out that is called The Connection, and then a plan called Connect Northglenn, I think probably to people who are watching or hear us refer to it can be very confusing. Because there were a couple of times tonight when you guys were like, oh, Connect Northglenn, and I'm like, oh, The Connection, I get that in my mailbox. So, you know, I imagine if I'm sitting here thinking that there are probably a whole bunch of other folks who are confusing the two. So if there is a way to...
and cross-pollinating so that
I know you're getting crazy with it. But if there's a way to make it just a little bit more clear and direct, I think that would be appreciated.
Our new CRM system, we loved Connect Northglenn, but it was taken, right? We are not. We're calling it Access Northglenn. And then the app will be Access NG. So try to be a little more clever.
Just two really quick points. One of the things that we are also working on, and we're going to be testing, is that we're doing video vignettes, kind of similar to like the TED Talk thing for the zoning code. Okay. So we've retained a recent graduate from CU who's putting that together. The other thing I also mentioned, like with the Civic Campus Master Plan, and I also believe for the Bike Ped Plan, is that we actually download all of the staff reports and the packets, as well as we have links to all the videos of all the meetings where we've had recordings take place. For that very reason, is so that folks who are not the let's go and spend, you know, a few hours of our evening watching people talk around a table type of thing. So we have thought of that and engaged that in the past with our projects.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so I didn't hear any dissension really, so I think you can move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. You're staying up there, Rob, or is Kent coming
I
forward?
don't think he needs me to.
All right, the next item is our residential street program.
On your own.
last item, Kent. No pressure.
Right. And I think we've adequately introduced transportation topics, so I'll let Kent just dive in.
Good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. In front of you is the residential street program as proposed. We have some mill and overlay streets and some chip seal streets for this year, and again we tried to divide those up into the wards. We included some information with respect to the LiDAR van and what a general condition of the street looks like with that PCI rating. And again, we did the PCI in 2016 and we'll be doing the PCI again in 2019. And with our new technology, that'll help really begin to build that database and give us a better understanding of what's going on with our roads, with our roadway network. I would like to, I guess, add, as I was listening, before all the hands go up, as I was listening in the hallway, and I was watching on YouTube, so that was pretty neat, listening to the bike ped plan, and then listening when I was in here with Brooke, and how it does all connect together this evening. We have identified, working with planning, 2 streets or 2 segments that are of high priority for the bike ped plan for our mill and overlay. The Grant from 104th to Muriel and the Larson from Malley to Phillips would both be high candidates for bike lane striping for that plan.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I think you have to facilitate.
So, I could do it, but.
You said to call on your council members.
She just has a question. I just have a question.
You just have to raise your hand now, right? Okay, so where are we? I'm doing my own reading over here. Jenny?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. So I don't know if this is the right time to ask this question, but we've heard a lot about how Huron is in desperate need of, I think, repaving or reconstruction. I don't know the proper term, but I'm not seeing that on here. Is there a reason why?
That's a separate CIP project because it's such a large-scale project that it would just eat up the entire residential street balance. So those large segments of streets, we really tried to identify those and put those in different capital projects. So that is, I believe that's on the books for next year, beginning design on that.
Okay, so that's something that we can talk about
Yeah,
later
so the distinction, I agree with what Kent said. I mean, if you've got these high volume arterial streets, you think of the section lines, 104th, 120th, Huron, Washington, et cetera. They're not really ever going to be fixed with the residential street program. This is intended to absolutely be residential streets that are connecting neighborhoods, through neighborhoods, maybe even some minor collector type things that we would improve. And I would note that our budget, we were at $450, I think, a year ago, and because of the extended deferred maintenance on a lot of these streets when the PCI came back, we changed that budget. You approved that budget to go to $750, and it's all the Adams County transportation tax dollars, so it did not impact the general fund negatively or the CIP negatively. But really, we think that's probably not enough either. But it's what we've got, so we're going to put all of it that we can into this program. Huron specifically, that number is roughly estimated at $10 to $15 million for a full reconstruction.
Okay, and then a follow-up question. Do we have a full list of, well, let me back up and ask. When was the last time that we sent a LiDAR truck on every single road in our city to assess PCI?
2016. That's what this does. That's what the truck does when we do it every 3 years. And we're required to do that and submit that data into the HUTF.
Okay, what is the
It's the participating program that shows all the transportation network that we're doing this, and we are evaluating our street network.
Okay, and then where can I find a list of how each of the roads rated? I'm just curious about Ward 4.
That's a 94-page document that I have here that I didn't feel like I wanted to include in your packet, but I would ask if anybody did want it, then yeah, certainly we can make that available.
Yeah.
And if you have questions on it, of how to read it or whatever, you know, we can try to help you.
Thank you for staying with us. I missed what was going on, so Marcy, you have a question already?
So when we talked a little bit about the Justice Center and the pavement, will we also ask for bids on that pavement through this process? And we'll have a follow-up. Go ahead. We're going to ask for a benefit of cost just for the pavement itself, but that project will be billed back to the Justice Center. So just because it's the paving contractor and we can, you know, the more concrete you do or the more asphalt that you do, then the better the price, hopefully, especially now that we're kind of here in February and we're hoping to get this out for bid quickly. We'll get on the good list of the bidding end. So we want to add that into this project, but it won't be the monies won't be taken out of the residential project. No, I got that. And so my follow-up to that is, do you anticipate that we could see a cost savings, that it would be enough that any other street could get added? Or would that be something you'd look at, or you don't really think it'll be that big a difference?
No, I think the Justice Center intersection is going to be a significant amount of money that won't be.
I guess I meant in the volume, because I realize that's coming out of a different budget, but if you're getting volume pricing, probably get volume pricing on the other streets.
Yes, I understand, yes.
Got it.
Yes. And we do, and we try to do that each year. If we can add a segment or something in there, we try to use every single dollar, even through the contingency, what is authorized, and try to get all those streets done. And included in the residential street program, I guess, as well, is sidewalks. So they do go around on those streets that we've identified, and they do fix sidewalks in the area.
Did you guys already talk about this entire thing while I was in the restroom? Seems like there was no time.
Some people didn't know you left.
Wow, thanks, Andrew.
Well, he had to step in. He didn't know you were gone.
It's okay. All right, well, if there's no questions.
Just in terms of timing, Kent, so this is the list we're going to bid out, and then what's timing when they'll see a contract?
Yeah, we'll put it out, and it'll probably be, what's February, early February, I would hope, spring break time, come back for the contract at the 27th, sometime in there, March, end of March.
Yeah.
And then we'll go, then we'll begin work. Hopefully we'll get it. And that was an issue last year because we went so late, because we didn't get this approved so late. So we have extra streets that didn't get chip sealed from last year that need to get redone. And some of the streets weren't in so great and they're under warranty, and we're going to have them do that too. So there's going to be a lot of black streets come hopefully the end of summer.
Cool. So we'll move forward. Is there anything else that was in order tonight, or?
I just want to mention one thing briefly. Next week we've got just a few different contracts and things, but one of the real important ones is the Ralston House construction contract. So we are furiously sending emails and burning the phones with our municipal partners. We've got 3 or 4 entities that we're still waiting for funds, but we've been coordinating, of course, with Public Works and Finance that hopefully we'll have a verbal update for you Monday night that everyone has paid, but you might see in your packet that not everyone is paid because we had to get the memo out this week.
But Jim, they have all approved.
Oh yes, the IGA is approved and the invoice was sent out in December.
Okay.
So their date to remit was January 31st. So that's why we were doing some follow-up.
Right.
And then the second thing I think, which of course I'm real proud of, is the annual work plan update. So we'll have an annual work plan update for 2017, which will also be an annual CIP update. So you can see where all of the projects are. Not just a chart with a bunch of dollars, but actually where are we at with each phase? Are we in design, construction, that type of thing? So we'll have that for you next week as well. And then just some other things, Jason's report, Debbie's report, things like that. So.
All right, sounds good. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Carol, you can.